Sometimes the cruelest thing in this world isn't the hardship we face, but the people who mock us for it. In the dusty western town, a young disabled girl sits alone in her wheelchair at the local saloon, enduring the cruel laughter of men who should know better. No one steps forward to help her. No one dares to speak up. Then the saloon doors swing open, and a mountain man walks in, silent, weathered, and carrying the kind of presence that stops hearts. With just one look, he silences every mockery in that room. What happens next teaches the whole town about real strength and standing up for what's right. But what made this lone stranger the only one brave enough to act? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Redemption Creek wasn't much to look at, even by Montana Territory standards. The town had sprung up almost overnight in the summer of 1879, when a prospector named Dutch Henry found color in the creek bed that wound through the valley. Within 6 months, 1,000 souls had poured into the basin, most of them chasing dreams of gold that would never materialize. By the spring of 1883, half those people had moved on, leaving behind a settlement that couldn't quite decide if it was dying or just stubbornly refusing to quit. The main street ran north to south, a broad avenue of packed earth that turned to soup when the rains came. On the east side stood the more respectable establishments, Bennett's blacksmith, the general store, the assayer's office, and the small whitewashed church that Reverend Morrison tended with more hope than attendance. The west side belonged to rougher commerce, the Dusty Rose Saloon, 2 competing boarding houses of questionable reputation, and a string of false-fronted buildings that seemed to change purpose every few months, depending on who had money and who had gone bust. The saloon dominated the western view, a 2-story structure with a covered porch and batwing doors that never stopped swinging. Inside, the air was perpetually thick with tobacco smoke, whiskey fumes, and the smell of sawdust that the bartender spread fresh every morning to soak up the previous night's spills. A long mahogany bar ran the length of the north wall, imported at great expense from San Francisco and polished until it gleamed even in the dim light. Behind it stood row upon row of bottles, some filled with actual spirits, others with colored water meant to impress the miners who couldn't tell the difference after their 3rd drink. Tables filled the main floor, their surfaces scarred with initials, poker hands, and the occasional knife mark from disputes that had gotten out of hand. A staircase at the back led to rooms on the 2nd floor where the saloon girls conducted their business, and where the owner, a shrewd widow named Margaret Hayes, kept her private quarters and her accounts locked in a safe that had survived the trip over the mountains. It was Margaret who had given Sarah Bennett her first real job, and for that, Sarah would always be grateful. Sarah was 19 years old, though most days she felt ancient. She had honey-colored hair that she kept pinned back in a practical bun, and eyes the color of creek water in summer, greenish-brown and always watching, always thinking. Her face was lovely in a way that snuck up on people. At first glance, folks saw only the wheelchair, that contraption of wood and metal that had become as much a part of her as her own arms. But those who took the time to look, really look, saw the intelligence in her eyes, the determined set of her jaw, and the way she held herself with a dignity that no amount of cruel circumstance could diminish. The wheelchair had been built by her father, James Bennett, who was the best blacksmith in 3 counties. He had crafted it with the same care he brought to everything he made, with wheels that rolled smooth and true, a seat cushioned with leather stuffed with horsehair, and a frame that could withstand the rough terrain of Redemption Creek's uneven boardwalks. He had made it 12 years ago, after the accident that had changed everything. Sarah had been 7 years old, playing near the forge while her father worked. A horse had spooked, no one ever determined exactly why, and kicked out with both rear legs. One hoof had caught Sarah square in the small of her back, and she had dropped like a stone. The town doctor, who was better with whiskey than medicine, had shaken his head and said the girl would never walk again. The spine was damaged, he said, and there wasn't anything to be done about it. James Bennet had never forgiven himself, though Sarah had told him 1,000 times that it wasn't his fault. He had been working, doing his job, and she had been where she wasn't supposed to be. Children got hurt. It was nobody's fault, just the way life unfolded sometimes. But guilt doesn't listen to reason, and James carried his like a stone in his chest. Sarah's mother, Catherine, had died 2 years after the accident, taken by pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. Sarah barely remembered her now, just fleeting impressions of gentle hands and a voice that sang old ballads while working at the stove. What she had left of her mother fit inside a silver locket that hung around her neck, a small photograph, faded and creased, showing a woman with kind eyes and a smile that suggested she had known joy before sickness took it away. After Catherine's death, it had been just Sarah and her father learning to navigate the world as a pair. James worked the forge and Sarah kept the books. She had a head for numbers that surprised even her, able to track accounts and orders with a precision that made her father shake his head in wonder. She handled the invoicing, the collections, and the negotiations with suppliers who tried to cheat them until they realized the girl in the wheelchair was sharper than most men twice her age. Margaret Hayes had noticed. The saloon owner needed someone to keep her accounts straight, someone who wouldn't skim from the till or get too drunk to remember what they were doing. Sarah was perfect. 3 afternoons a week, she would wheel herself to the Dusty Rose, settle in at a corner table with Margaret's ledgers, and work through the numbers while the saloon conducted its business around her. Most of the regulars had gotten used to her presence. They nodded politely when she arrived, and some of the kinder souls even asked after her father's health or commented on the weather. But there were always new faces in a mining town, and there were always men who saw vulnerability and thought it was entertainment. Clem Dawson was one of those men. He had arrived in Redemption Creek 6 months ago with a crew of rough characters who worked a marginal claim up in the hills. The claim produced just enough color to keep them drinking, but not enough to make them rich, which left them perpetually angry at the world and looking for someone to blame. Clem was their natural leader, a big man with a bigger mouth and a mean streak that got wider with every drink. He was the kind of man who couldn't see a dog without wanting to kick it, who took pleasure in making others feel small so he could feel large. He had cold eyes, the color of dirty ice, and hands that bore the scars of a lifetime of violence. Men instinctively gave him space, and women instinctively avoided him. He liked it that way. Clem and his men had taken to spending most evenings at the Dusty Rose, drinking away their earnings and playing cards with a casual dishonesty that everyone recognized, but no one challenged. The sheriff, a timid man named Walter Perkins, had made it clear he wasn't interested in trouble. As long as no one got killed, he was content to let things slide. This policy of convenient blindness had allowed Clem to become bolder. He had started with small cruelties, knocking into people, making crude comments to the saloon girls, cheating openly at cards. When no one stopped him, he escalated. Last month, he had beaten a Chinese laundryman half to death over a disputed bill. Sheriff Perkins had called it a misunderstanding and let Clem walk. Free. The town had learned to live with Clem Dawson. The way you learn to live with a toothache, constant discomfort that you try to ignore until it gets so bad you can't think of anything. Elder Sarah had seen plenty of men like Clem. She had learned to make herself small, to avoid eye contact, to finish her work and leave before trouble could find her. It was a survival strategy born of hard experience. But even the best strategies fail eventually. Up in the mountains, beyond the reach of Redemption Creek's thin veneer of civilization, there lived a man who most folks spoke of in whispers. They called him the Mountain Man, though some of the older settlers knew his real name, Ezra Stone. The stories about him varied depending on who was telling them. Some said he was an ex-soldier who had gone mad with grief. Others claimed he was a fugitive hiding from the law. A few of the more romantic souls suggested he was a heartbroken widower who couldn't bear to live among people anymore. The truth, as usual, was both simpler and more complicated than any of the stories. Ezra Stone came down from the mountains perhaps once a month, always alone, always silent. He would trade pelts and gold dust for supplies at the general store, exchange brief nods with the few people he recognized, and then disappear back into the high country before most folks even realized he had been in town. He never stayed long enough for conversation, never accepted invitations to share a drink or a meal. He moved through Redemption Creek like a ghost, present but not quite there. Those who had gotten close enough to study him, and there weren't many, saw a man who looked to be in his 40s. Though hard living can age a person beyond their years, he was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of lean muscle that comes from constant physical work. His hair was dark, shot through with silver, and he wore it longer than was fashionable, tied back with a leather cord. His face was weathered and angular, with deep-set eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. He kept a beard, neatly trimmed, and he moved with the kind of deliberate grace that suggested a man who was comfortable in his own body and confident in his ability to handle whatever came his way, but it was his presence that people remembered most. When Ezra Stone entered a room, something shifted. Conversations didn't exactly stop, but they quieted. People straightened up a little, became more aware of themselves and their surroundings. It wasn't that he was threatening exactly, though he did carry a knife on his belt and walked with a staff that looked like it could crack skulls if needed. It was something deeper, something that suggested this was a man who had seen things and done things, and come out the other side changed, but not broken. The native people who still lived in the area treated him with respect, which told its own story. The Shoshone didn't respect white men easily, but they respected Ezra Stone. He spoke their language, followed their customs, and left offerings at the sacred places in the mountains. There were rumors that he had been married to a Shoshone woman once, that he had lived among them, that he understood their ways better than most white men understood their own. James Bennett was one of the few townspeople who had actually talked with Ezra beyond basic pleasantries. The mountain man brought his tools in for repair sometimes, and James had found him to be quiet but courteous, a man who appreciated good craftsmanship and paid his debts promptly. They had never discussed personal matters, but James sensed a kindred spirit, another man carrying grief he couldn't quite put down. Sarah had seen Ezra Stone exactly 3 times in her life before the day everything changed. Each time, he had been passing through town, focused on his business and seemingly unaware of the world around him. But each time, she had felt his presence like a change in air pressure before a storm. She couldn't have explained why he made such an impression. He had never spoken to her, never even looked directly at her. Yet somehow she knew that if he did look, he would see her, not the wheelchair, not the disability, but her. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Sarah wheeled herself into the dusty rows with her father's invoice. James had shod 8 horses for the mining company, and the payment was 10 days overdue. Margaret wasn't responsible for the debt, but the mining company's manager, a pompous fool named Hutchins, spent most afternoons playing cards at the saloon. Sarah figured she could catch him there and settle the account without having to make the difficult journey up to the mine office. The saloon was moderately busy for a weekday. A dozen men occupied the tables, some playing cards, others just drinking away the afternoon. The saloon girls moved among them with practiced smiles, encouraging drinks and deflecting unwanted advances with equal skill. Margaret was behind the bar, going over her inventory with a sharp eye for anything that had gone missing. Sarah maneuvered her wheelchair through the batwing doors and across the sawdust-covered floor. She had learned to navigate the Dusty Rose's interior years ago, knew which tables to avoid because their legs were too close together, which floorboards were too uneven for her wheels. She was halfway to Hutchins's usual table when she heard the first comment. "Well, look what rolled in." It was Clem Dawson's voice, thick with whiskey and malice. Sarah kept moving, pretending she hadn't heard. Sometimes if you didn't react, men like Clem got bored and moved on to easier targets. "Hey, I'm talking to you, girlie." Sarah stopped. She couldn't avoid this, and pretending she could would only make it worse. She turned her wheelchair to face Clem's table, where he sat with 4 of his crew, cards and coins scattered before them. She kept her face neutral, her voice level. "Good afternoon, Mr. Dawson. I'm here on business with Mr. Hutchins. I don't mean to disturb your game," Clem grinned, showing teeth that had gone yellow from neglect. "Business? Ain't that fancy? You collecting bills for your daddy? He too scared to come himself. My father is working. I handle the accounts. Course you do. What else can a cripple do but sit around counting other people's money?" The word hit like a slap, but Sarah had been called worse. She had learned long ago that responding to cruelty with anger only fed it. "Mr. Hutchins owes us for work completed. I'd appreciate it if you'd let me conduct my business." "Conduct your business," Clem mocked, his voice rising so everyone in the saloon could hear. "Listen to her talk, boys. Like she's some kind of lady." He leaned back in his chair, warming to his audience. "Tell me something, girlie. How exactly do you get around? Someone got to carry you like a sack of flour?" His men laughed, the ugly sound of men who were grateful someone else was being humiliated instead of them. Sarah felt her face grow hot, but she kept her voice steady. "I managed just fine, thank you." "Managed just fine," Clem repeated. "Well, ain't that inspiring? A cripple managing just fine." He stood up, swaying slightly, and Sarah realized he was drunker than she had thought. Drunk and mean was a dangerous combination. "Tell you what, boys, I bet she can't even—" "That's enough, Clem." It was Margaret's voice, sharp and commanding from behind the bar. The saloon owner had her hands planted on the mahogany, her face set in a way that suggested she wasn't going to tolerate any nonsense. "Leave the girl alone and get back to your cards." Clem turned to face Margaret, his grin widening. "Oh, now the madam wants to defend the cripple. That's sweet, real sweet." He took a step toward Sarah's wheelchair. "But I'm just having a conversation here. Just being friendly." There was nothing friendly about the way he moved, nothing friendly about the look in his eyes. Sarah's heart was pounding now, her mind racing through options. The door was 15 feet away. She could probably make it if she moved fast, but that would mean abandoning her father's invoice, abandoning her dignity, running away like prey. She had spent 12 years refusing to be prey. "Mr. Dawson," she said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded, "I think you've had enough to drink. Why don't you sit down before you embarrass yourself further?" It was the wrong thing to say. She knew it the moment the words left her mouth. Clem's face darkened, and his hand shot out, grabbing the handle of her wheelchair. "Embarrass myself? You think I'm embarrassed?" He started pushing her wheelchair roughly across the floor, angling toward the door. "Let me show you embarrassing, girlie. Let's see how you do when—" The wheelchair hit an uneven floorboard and lurched. Sarah grabbed the arms to steady herself, but Clem was pushing too hard, too fast. The front wheel caught on the edge of a warped board, and suddenly the whole chair was tipping forward. Sarah's father's papers flew from her lap, scattering across the sawdust floor. She threw her hands out to catch herself. But the angle was wrong, and she was going to hit face first. And then the saloon doors burst open with a bang that silenced every voice in the room. Ezra Stone stood in the doorway of the Dusty Rose Saloon like a figure carved from the mountain itself. The afternoon sun behind him cast his shadow long across the sawdust floor, and for a moment no one moved. No one breathed. The air itself seemed to hold still, waiting. He took in the scene with a single sweep of his eyes. Sarah, her wheelchair tipped at a dangerous angle, her hands braced against the floor. Clem Dawson standing over her with his hand still on the chair's handle, his face flushed with drink and cruelty. The scattered papers, the watching faces of men who had done nothing to help. Ezra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he moved. He crossed the distance to Sarah in 4 long strides, his boots making no sound despite his size. Clem was still processing the interruption, his whiskey-soaked brain trying to catch up with what was happening, when Ezra simply lifted the wheelchair, with Sarah still in it, and set it upright as easily as another man might right a tipped chair. "You all right, miss?" His voice was deep and quiet, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. Sarah looked up at him, her heart still hammering from the near fall. Up close, Ezra Stone was even more imposing than she had imagined. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they held hers with an intensity that was somehow reassuring rather than frightening. She saw no pity in those eyes, no awkward discomfort. Just a simple question that deserved a simple answer. "I'm fine," she managed. "Thank you." Ezra nodded once, then knelt to gather her scattered papers. He moved with surprising care for such a large man, collecting each sheet and tapping them together into a neat stack before handing them back to her. His hands, she noticed, were scarred and calloused but clean, the hands of someone who worked hard but took pride in himself. "Hey!" Clem's voice broke the spell. He had found his courage again, or what passed for courage when you were drunk and angry. "Hey, I was just having some fun with the girl." "Ain't no concern of yours, mountain man." Ezra stood slowly, turning to face Clem. The difference in their heights wasn't dramatic. Clem was a big man himself, but somehow Ezra seemed to occupy more space, to exert more presence. When he spoke, his voice remained quiet, almost conversational. Fun. It wasn't a question. It was a statement that hung in the air like an accusation. "That's right," Clem said, puffing up his chest. "Just having a laugh. God knows I didn't mean nothing by it." He glanced at his crew for support, and they nodded dutifully. Though none of them looked particularly eager to get involved, Ezra studied Clem the way you might study a snake before deciding whether to kill it or just walk away. "Looked like you were tipping her chair. Looked like she was about to hit the floor face first. Well, maybe if she stayed home where cripples belong." "She wouldn't." Ezra's hand shot out and grabbed the front of Clem's shirt, pulling him close so fast that Clem didn't have time to react. Suddenly, they were nose to nose, and whatever Clem saw in Ezra's eyes made him go very still. "You're going to apologize to the lady," Ezra said softly, "and then you're going to sit down, finish your drink quietly, and think real hard about what kind of man picks on a young woman who can't walk away from him." "I don't have to apologize for nothing," Clem said, but his voice had lost its swagger. "You can't tell me what to—" "I'm not telling you." Ezra's voice dropped even lower. "I'm giving you a chance to be a better man than you were 5 minutes ago. Most folks don't get that chance. I suggest you take it." The saloon was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking behind the bar. Every eye was on the two men, waiting to see what would happen next. Clem's crew had half risen from their chairs, hands drifting toward weapons, but none of them seemed eager to be the first to move. Margaret spoke from behind the bar, her voice careful. "Ezra, I appreciate what you're doing, but—" "Ma'am," Ezra didn't take his eyes off Clem, "I apologize for the disturbance. I'll be leaving shortly. Soon as this gentleman remembers his manners." Clem's face was turning red, a combination of rage and humiliation. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "You're making a big mistake, old man. You got any idea who I am? Who my brother is?" "Don't know and don't care." Ezra released Clem's shirt and took a step back, giving him space. "All I care about is that you apologize to Miss—" He paused, realizing he didn't know Sarah's name. "Bennett," Sarah said quietly. "Sarah Bennett, Miss Bennett," Ezra continued. "You apologize to Miss Bennett, and we can all go about our business." Clem smoothed his shirt with shaking hands. His eyes darted around the room, taking in all the watching faces, calculating his options. He was trapped between his pride and his sense of self-preservation, and everyone knew it. "Fine," he spat finally. "Sorry, girlie. Didn't mean nothing by it." The words were poison wrapped in silk, empty of any real remorse, but they were words. "Apology noted," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the trembling she felt inside. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to conduct." She wheeled herself toward Hutchins's table, her back straight, refusing to show how shaken she was. Ezra stood watching until she reached her destination and began speaking with the mining manager in low tones. Only then did he turn back to Clem. "One more thing," Ezra said, and something in his voice made Clem freeze. "I know exactly who your brother is. Jacob Dawson, wanted in Colorado for cattle theft and murder, wanted in Wyoming for bank robbery. Last I heard, he was running with a gang of 12 men, all of them meaner than rabid dogs." Clem's face went pale. "How do you—" "I know a lot of things," Ezra said. "I know that Jacob thinks he's untouchable because he keeps moving, never stays in one place long enough for the law to catch up. I know that you like to trade on his reputation, make yourself feel important by association. And I know that if he knew his little brother was spending his time tormenting young women in wheelchairs, he'd probably be ashamed of you. You don't know nothing about my brother, Clem hissed. I know he's got more pride than you do, Ezra said. Mean as he is, Jacob Dawson wouldn't pick on someone who couldn't fight back. That's a special kind of coward, and it's all yours. Clem's hand dropped to the knife on his belt. His crew started to stand. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, ready to tip into violence. Then Ezra smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that said he had seen this situation 100 times before, and knew exactly how it would end, and he wasn't worried at all. Go ahead, he said quietly. Pull that knife. Give me a reason. Clem's hand trembled on the hilt. His eyes searched Ezra's face, looking for something. Fear, uncertainty, hesitation, and finding nothing but calm certainty. Whatever Clem saw there made him lift his hand away from the weapon. This ain't over, he said, trying to salvage some scrap of dignity. Yes, it is, Ezra replied. You're going to finish your drink, pay your tab, and walk out of here. And from now on, when Miss Bennet comes into this saloon, you're going to treat her with respect. You're going to treat her the same way you'd want someone to treat your own sister if you've got one. And if I don't? Ezra's expression didn't change. Then you'll find out why I lived alone in the mountains for 15 years. You'll find out what happens when a man decides he doesn't care about consequences anymore. And I promise you, Clem Dawson, that's not a lesson you want to learn. The threat hung in the air, quiet and absolute. Clem stood there for another moment, his pride warring with his survival instinct. Finally, survival won. He dropped back into his chair, grabbed his whiskey glass and drained it in one gulp. Come on, boys, he muttered to his crew. Place smells like mountain trash anyway. They left their coins on the table and filed out, Clem leading the way. He paused at the door to give Ezra one last venomous look. But Ezra had already dismissed him. His attention turned to Sarah, who was finishing her conversation with Hutchins. When she wheeled back toward the door, Ezra was waiting. He held the batwing doors open for her, and she passed through with a nod of thanks. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm on her face. She stopped her wheelchair on the boardwalk and looked up at him. I'm grateful for what you did in there, Mr. Stone, but I need you to understand something. Her voice was firm, not angry, but not soft either. I've been taking care of myself for a long time. I don't need a protector, Ezra finished. I know. That's not what I was doing, Sarah blinked, surprised. It wasn't. No, ma'am. You were handling that situation just fine. Kept your dignity. Didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing you scared. That took courage. He paused, choosing his words carefully. What I was doing was reminding that man what it means to be decent. That's got nothing to do with you needing help, and everything to do with him needing to be taught a lesson. Sarah studied his face, searching for condescension or pity, and finding neither. Most people don't see it that way. Most people see the chair and think I'm helpless. Most people are fools, Ezra said simply. He gestured to her wheelchair. One of your wheels is loose. The left front. Your father should tighten the bolt before it causes problems. Sarah glanced down and realized he was right. The wheel had been wobbling slightly for days, but she had been meaning to mention it to her father and kept forgetting. How did you... I notice things, Ezra said. He touched the brim of his hat. Be safe, Miss Bennet. He turned and walked down the street toward the general store, his walking stick tapping a steady rhythm on the boards. Sarah watched him go, her mind full of questions she hadn't thought to ask. Inside the dusty rows, Margaret was already spreading word of what had happened. By sundown, the whole town would know that Ezra Stone had faced down Clem Dawson and his crew. Some would call him a hero. Others would say he was a fool who had just made himself a powerful enemy. Sarah wheeled herself slowly home, her father's payment tucked safely in the pocket of her dress. The left front wheel wobbled with every turn, a small reminder of a man who saw details that others missed, who had stood up when no one else would. She didn't know it yet, but everything had just changed. The wheel would break completely in 3 days, and when it did, Ezra Stone would be there to fix it, beginning a connection that would transform both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. 3 days passed before Sarah saw Ezra Stone again. 3 days during which the town talked of nothing else but the confrontation at the Dusty Rose. The story grew with each telling, as stories do. Some versions had Ezra pulling a gun. Others claimed he had lifted Clem off his feet with one hand. A few of the more dramatic accounts suggested he had threatened to burn down Clem's mining claim if he didn't leave town. James Bennett heard all these versions while working his forge, hammering horseshoes and listening to his customers gossip. He said nothing, just let them talk while he worked. But that evening, after closing up the smithy, he sat with Sarah on their small porch and asked her what had really happened. She told him the truth, leaving nothing out. When she finished, James was quiet for a long time, staring out at the street where the last light of day painted everything in shades of amber. "This Ezra Stone," he said finally. "You think he's trouble?" Sarah considered the question. "I think he's a man who doesn't like bullies. I think he saw something wrong and fixed it. And you think that's the end of it? You think Clem Dawson is just going to let this go?" "No," Sarah admitted. "I think Clem's pride is hurt, and men like him don't handle that well." "But Papa, what was I supposed to do? Let him push me around? Let him think I know," James interrupted gently. "I know, sweetheart. You did right. I just worry is all. Worry what might come of it." "Let it come," Sarah said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "I'm tired of being careful. Tired of making myself small so men like Clem Dawson don't notice me. If standing up for myself brings trouble, then so be it." James looked at his daughter, seeing not the 7-year-old girl who had been hurt, but the woman she had become, strong, determined, and fiercer than most people realized. He felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. Pride that she refused to be diminished by her circumstances. Fear that her courage might cost her more than she was prepared to pay. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said softly. Sarah touched the locket at her throat, feeling the familiar weight of it. "I hope so." The next morning, Sarah was helping her father organize the smithy's supply room when she heard the distinctive wobble of her wheelchair's front wheel getting worse. She'd been meaning to ask James to fix it, but he had been swamped with orders, and she kept putting it off. Now, as she rolled across the uneven floor, the wheel gave a sharp crack and simply fell off, sending her lurching forward. James caught her before she could fall, his strong arms steadying her. "Easy there. Let's get you into a chair." He lifted her, she barely weighed anything to him, and set her on a wooden stool while he examined the wheelchair. The wheel hadn't just come loose. The bolt had sheared clean through, and the axle housing was cracked. It was going to take time to fix, time he didn't really have with all the work waiting. "I can put you in your old chair for now," James said, referring to the smaller, cruder wheelchair Sarah had used as a child. "But it's not going to be comfortable. This one needs a few hours of work, and I've got 3 rush orders. I can fix it." They both turned to find Ezra Stone standing in the doorway of the smithy, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning sun. He held his walking stick in one hand, and over his shoulder was a pack that suggested he had just come down from the mountains. "Mr. Stone," James said, recovering from his surprise. "Didn't hear you come in." "Didn't mean to startle you." Ezra stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dimmer light. "Came to see about getting my knife sharpened, but I couldn't help overhearing." He nodded toward the wheelchair. "I know something about metalwork. I could fix that while you handle your other orders." James hesitated. He didn't know Ezra Stone well, and there was something about the man that made him cautious. Not threatening exactly, but intense. Like being near a banked fire that could flare up without warning. "That's a kind offer," James said carefully. "But I don't like to impose on—" "You're not imposing." "I'm offering." Ezra set down his pack and approached the wheelchair, kneeling to examine the damage. He ran his fingers over the broken bolt and cracked housing, his expression thoughtful. "This is good work. You build this yourself?" 12 years ago, James confirmed. "It's held up well, but 12 years of daily use, rolling over rough ground, carrying weight. It's held up better than well. It's held up perfectly." Ezra glanced at Sarah. "You take good care of it, miss?" "I try to," Sarah said. There was something mesmerizing about watching him work. His hands were gentle but sure, touching the metal as if he could read its history through his fingertips. "I can see that. The leather's been oiled regularly. The joints are clean. This break isn't from neglect. It's from that fool pushing you too hard 3 days ago." Ezra looked up at James. "I can fix this, and I can reinforce it so it won't happen again. Take me about 2 hours, but I'll need to use your forge and your tools." James considered this. 2 hours of work from a stranger, using his equipment, on something as important as his daughter's wheelchair. It was a lot of trust to extend to a man he barely knew. But there was something in Ezra's eyes, a quiet competence, a certainty that he knew what he was doing. "All right," James said finally. "But I'll work alongside you. This is my daughter's chair. I want to know it's done right." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Ezra said. They worked together through the morning, James and Ezra, while Sarah kept the books at a nearby table. It was strange seeing them side by side. Her father, stocky and strong from years at the forge, and Ezra, lean and tall like a man carved from mountain stone. They didn't talk much, just the occasional question about tools or technique. But Sarah could see them taking each other's measure, developing a mutual respect through shared work. Ezra's hands moved with practiced efficiency. He forged a new bolt from high-carbon steel, making it thicker than the original. He reinforced the axle housing with carefully shaped brackets. He even adjusted the alignment slightly, improving the wheel's tracking. It was clear he had done this kind of work before, though where and when remained a mystery. "You've got a good touch with the hammer," James observed, watching Ezra shape a piece of metal with precise strikes. "Had a good teacher once," Ezra replied. He didn't elaborate, and James didn't press. Around mid-morning, Margaret Hayes stopped by with a basket of fresh bread, a weekly ritual she had with James. She paused when she saw Ezra at the forge, her eyebrows rising. "Well," she said, "this is unexpected." "Ezra's fixing Sarah's wheelchair," James explained. "Broke down this morning." Margaret looked at Sarah, then at Ezra, then back at Sarah. Something knowing passed across her face, but she kept it to herself. "That's right kind of you, Mr. Stone. Just helping out, ma'am." "Mm-hmm." Margaret set the basket on the table. "You'll stay for lunch, then?" "All of you." "I won't take no for an answer. It wasn't really a request, and no one treated it like one." When the wheelchair was finished, they gathered around the table in the corner of the smithy, sharing bread and cheese and cold water from the well. It was a simple meal, but there was something companionable about it, something that made Sarah feel like maybe the walls she had built around herself were starting to come down. Ezra ate slowly, listening more than talking. But when he did speak, his words carried weight. He told them about the mountains, about the way the aspens were starting to turn gold, about a family of foxes he had been watching near his cabin. He spoke plainly, without embellishment, painting pictures with simple words that made Sarah see what he saw. "You live alone up there?" James asked. "Mostly," Ezra said. "Sometimes the Shoshone come through. We share meals, trade stories. But yes, mostly alone. Don't you get lonely?" It was Sarah who asked, and immediately wished she hadn't. It was too personal, too direct. But Ezra didn't seem offended. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But lonely and alone aren't the same thing. I chose solitude because I needed it. Needed to figure out who I was without—" He paused, searching for words. "Without all the noise of other people's expectations. And did you?" Sarah asked. "Figure out who you are?" Ezra was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "I figured out who I'm not. That's a start." The conversation moved on to other things, but Sarah found herself thinking about his words long after lunch was over. Who I'm not? What did that mean? What had he been before he became the mountain man? What had driven him to isolation? When the wheelchair was ready, Ezra lifted Sarah into it with the same careful ease he had shown in the saloon. His touch was impersonal but gentle, the touch of someone who understood that being helped could feel vulnerable and tried to minimize that feeling. "Try it out," he said. Stepping back, Sarah rolled forward, then back, then in a tight circle. The repaired wheel was perfect, better than it had been before. The whole chair moved more smoothly, more responsively. She looked up at Ezra with genuine amazement. "This is incredible. It feels brand new. Should last you another 12 years, Ezra said. Longer if you're careful. How much do I owe you? James asked, reaching for his cash box. Nothing, Ezra said. He held up a hand before James could protest. You let me use your forge and your tools. We'll call it even. That's not even, Ezra repeated firmly. He picked up his pack and his walking stick. I should be getting on. Wait, Sarah said. The word came out before she could think about it. I thank you, not just for the chair, but for the other day. At the saloon, Ezra studied her face for a long moment. You don't need to thank me for that, Miss Bennet. Any decent man would have done the same. But none of them did, Sarah said quietly. You did. Something shifted in Ezra's expression, a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the man beneath the mountain man. I've spent a long time running from who I used to be, he said. Lately, I've been thinking maybe I was running from the wrong thing. Maybe what I needed to run from wasn't the man I was, but the man I'd become if I didn't stand up when it mattered. He touched his hat brim in farewell and walked out into the midday sun. Sarah watched him go, her mind full of questions and a strange feeling she couldn't quite name. It felt like recognition, like meeting someone who spoke a language she had been speaking alone for years. James put a hand on her shoulder. That's an interesting man. Yes, Sarah agreed. He is. What she didn't say, what she was only beginning to understand, was that Ezra Stone had given her more than a repaired wheelchair. He had given her something she had been missing for a long time, the sense that someone saw her not as a problem to be solved or a tragedy to be pitied, but simply as a person worth standing up for. It was a gift she didn't know how to repay. But she would find a way. Ezra Stone didn't leave town that afternoon, as everyone expected. Instead, he took a room at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, paid for a week in advance, and settled in like a man who had decided something important and wasn't going to be rushed away from it. The town noticed. In a place like Redemption Creek, where everyone knew everyone else's business, a change in routine was like a pebble thrown into still water. The ripples spread fast and far. At the general store, old Mr. Henderson commented that he couldn't remember the last time the mountain man had stayed more than a few hours. At the Dusty Rose, Margaret Hayes poured drinks and listened to speculation about what had brought Ezra down from his mountain and what would keep him here. And at Clem Dawson's mining camp 5 miles up into the hills, men sharpened knives and cleaned guns and muttered about disrespect that needed answering. Sarah knew none of this when Ezra appeared at the smithy door the next morning, carrying a small leather bag and that same walking stick that seemed to be part of him. Morning. Miss Bennet, he said, his voice carrying that same quiet authority it always held. Wonder if I might have a word. James looked up from the horseshoe he was shaping. Something wrong with the chair already. Chair's fine, Ezra assured him. This is something else. Something I wanted to propose to Miss Bennet if she's willing to hear it. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest. She had been thinking about Ezra Stone quite a bit since yesterday, more than she probably should have, but she hadn't expected to see him again so soon. I'm listening. Ezra glanced at James as if asking permission, and James nodded. Whatever this was about, he trusted his daughter to handle it. I've been thinking, Ezra began, choosing his words with care, about what happened at the saloon. About men like Clem Dawson and how they pick their targets. They go after people they think can't fight back. And mostly they're right. Mostly their targets can't fight back, not because they're weak, but because they've never been taught how. Sarah felt her spine straighten. Mr. Stone, if you're suggesting I'm helpless, hard work. Ezra's hands moved with practiced efficiency. He forged a new bolt from high-carbon steel, making it thicker than the original. He reinforced the axle housing with carefully shaped brackets. He even adjusted the alignment slightly, improving the wheel's tracking. It was clear he had done this kind of work before, though where and when remained a mystery. I'm suggesting the opposite, Ezra interrupted gently. I'm suggesting you're stronger than you know, and that with the right training, you could be strong enough that men like Clem would think twice before bothering you. Training. Sarah repeated. You mean what? Fighting. I mean self-defense. Adapted for your situation. Ezra moved closer, his expression earnest. Being in that chair doesn't make you helpless, Miss Bennet. But it does change how you have to approach defending yourself. There are techniques, things I learned over the years, that don't require standing up or running away. Ways to use leverage and surprise. Ways to make an attacker regret choosing you as a target. James had stopped working, his hammer frozen mid-swing. You want to teach my daughter how to fight? I want to teach your daughter how to not need my help next time some drunk fool decides to push her around. Ezra turned to James. With your permission, of course. I wouldn't presume to... Why? The question came from Sarah, sharp and direct. Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Ezra was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. I had a daughter once. She was about your age when she died. Smallpox took her and her mother both 15 years ago. He paused, his jaw working. I couldn't protect them from disease. Couldn't do anything but watch them slip away. But there are things I can protect against. Things I can teach. And maybe that counts for something. The smithy was silent, except for the distant sound of someone hammering metal down the street. Sarah looked at this man, this stranger who had carried grief into the mountains and lived with it alone for 15 years, and she understood something fundamental about him. He wasn't offering to help her out of pity or obligation. He was offering because teaching her meant his skills, his knowledge, his years of experience wouldn't die unused and meaningless in a mountain cabin. What would these lessons entail? She asked. An hour a day if you can spare it. We'd start with awareness, how to read danger before it arrives, then basic defensive techniques, how to break a grip, how to strike effectively from a seated position, how to use objects around you as weapons if you need to. Ezra shifted his weight. It won't be easy. Some of it will be uncomfortable. But I promise you, Miss Bennet, if you commit to learning, I'll commit to teaching you everything I know. Sarah looked at her father. James's face was a complicated map of emotions. Concern, protectiveness, but also something that might have been hope. He had spent 12 years trying to keep his daughter safe, building walls around her with love and worry. Maybe he was starting to realize that walls could become prisons. What do you think, Papa? Sarah asked softly. James set down his hammer. I think... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think your mother always said you were stronger than people gave you credit for. I think maybe it's time I stopped trying to protect you from everything and started trusting you to protect yourself. He looked at Ezra. But if my daughter gets hurt, then I'll answer for it, Ezra said simply. You have my word. Something passed between the two men, an understanding that went deeper than words. James nodded slowly. All right then. But the lessons happen here, where I can see what's going on. And if Sarah wants to stop at any time, that's the end of it. Agreed, Ezra said. He looked at Sarah. What do you say, Miss Bennet? You willing to give this a try? Sarah felt a thrill of something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. The sense that her life might be more than just keeping books and rolling from place to place, always at the mercy of other people's kindness or cruelty. The sense that she could be more than a victim waiting to be rescued. Yes, she said, I want to learn. They started that very afternoon, in the clear space behind the smithy where James stored lumber and scrap metal. Ezra began not with fighting but with observation. The first rule of staying safe, he said, is knowing when you're not safe. Most people walk through the world half asleep. They don't notice the man watching them from across the street. Don't notice when someone's following them. Don't notice the signs that something's wrong until it's too late. He had Sarah practice scanning her surroundings, identifying exits, noting who was around her and what they were doing. It seemed simple, almost too simple. But as the lesson went on, Sarah began to understand the deeper principle. Awareness was power. Knowledge was defense. When you rolled into the saloon the other day, Ezra said, what did you notice? Sarah thought back. I noticed Mr. Hutchins at his usual table. I noticed Margaret behind the bar. What about Clem and his men? Where were they sitting? Sarah had to admit she didn't remember. She had been so focused on her errand, so determined to get in and out quickly, that she hadn't really looked. "That's natural," Ezra said, not criticizing. "You had a goal and you focused on it. But from now on, every time you enter a room, I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. Where are the exits? Who's between me and those exits? And is anyone paying too much attention to me?" They practiced this for the rest of the first lesson, with Ezra playing the role of various characters in imagined scenarios. It felt silly at first, like a child's game, but Sarah found herself getting drawn in, her mind sharpening as she learned to read rooms and situations differently. When the hour was up, she was exhausted in a way she hadn't expected, mentally drained from the constant vigilance Ezra was teaching her to maintain. "That's enough for today," Ezra said. "Tomorrow we'll start on physical techniques. But tonight, I want you to practice what we worked on. Every room you enter, every person you pass, notice everything. Make it a habit." The lessons continued daily after that. Ezra was a patient teacher, never frustrated when Sarah struggled, always finding new ways to explain a concept or demonstrate a technique. He taught her how to break a wrist grip using leverage instead of strength, showed her the vulnerable points on the human body, eyes, throat, groin, and how to strike them effectively. Gave her exercises to build upper body strength, since that was where her power would come from. But more than the physical techniques, he taught her confidence. With each lesson, Sarah felt herself changing, felt the fearful, careful girl she had been starting to transform into someone who refused to be a victim. It showed in the way she held herself, the way she met people's eyes, the way she moved through the world. James watched this transformation with mixed emotions. Pride, certainly, his daughter was becoming formidable, but also a kind of wistful sadness, the feeling that she was moving beyond his protection, becoming someone who didn't need him quite so much anymore. One evening, about 2 weeks into the lessons, he and Ezra stood together, watching Sarah practice what she had learned. Striking at a makeshift target Ezra had fashioned from old canvas and sawdust. "You're good with her," James said quietly. "Patient. My wife would have liked you." Ezra glanced at him, surprised by the personal comment. "Your wife passed, I understand?" 2 years after Sarah's accident, pneumonia. James's voice was rough. "I blame myself for both things. Still do most days. If I had been watching Sarah more carefully at the forge, if I had gotten Catherine to the doctor sooner." "You can't live in the past like that," Ezra said softly. "It'll eat you alive from the inside," says the man who spent 15 years alone on a mountain. Ezra was quiet for a long moment. "You're right. I'm a hypocrite, but maybe that's why I can recognize the signs. I spent a decade and a half punishing myself for not saving my family. It didn't bring them back, didn't make anything better, just made me hollow. What changed?" James asked. "Why come down now?" Ezra watched Sarah land a solid strike on the target, saw the satisfaction on her face. "I don't know that anything changed. Maybe I just got tired of being hollow. Or maybe I realized that the best way to honor the people we've lost is to help the people who are still here." James nodded slowly. They stood in companionable silence, 2 men who had both lost wives, both carried guilt, both found something worth fighting for in a young woman who refused to be diminished by circumstance. "She talks about you," James said after a while. "In the evenings after supper. Says you tell her about the mountains, about the places you've been. Does she?" Ezra tried to keep his voice neutral, but something flickered in his expression. "She's fond of you," James continued. "In case you haven't noticed." "I've noticed," Ezra admitted. "I'm trying to be careful about it. She's young, and she's been through a lot. Last thing she needs is some old mountain man getting ideas." "You're not that old," James observed. "What are you, 45? 46? 43, Ezra corrected. "But I feel about 100 most days." James smiled slightly. "That's just life, friend. We all feel older than we are." He paused, then added carefully, "For what it's worth, I think my daughter could do a lot worse than a man who sees her for who she is, instead of what happened to her." Ezra looked at him sharply. "James, this isn't about—" "I know," James said. "Right now it's about teaching her to defend herself. Right now it's just friendship and respect. but feelings have a way of growing when you're not looking. Just wanted you to know that if they do grow, well, you have my blessing to see where they lead." When the time is right, before Ezra could respond, Sarah called out to them, "Are you two going to stand there gossiping, or is someone going to tell me if I'm doing this right?" Both men laughed, the tension broken. They walked over to Sarah, and Ezra spent the next 20 minutes correcting her form and praising her progress. While James returned to closing up the smithy for the night, that evening, Ezra walked Sarah home as had become his habit. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. They moved slowly, Sarah's wheelchair rolling smoothly over the packed earth, Ezra's walking stick keeping time beside her. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said. "Of course. Why a walking stick? You don't limp. You don't seem to need it for balance." Ezra held up the stick, examining it in the fading light. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Dark wood, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story, worn smooth by years of use. "My wife made this," he said quietly. "She was Shoshone. Spent a whole winter carving it, working on it a little bit each evening while I told her stories. These symbols," he traced a finger over the carved patterns. "They're her language, written in wood. They tell the story of how we met, how we fell in love, how we built a life together." Sarah looked at the walking stick with new eyes, seeing it now not as a tool, but as a love letter carved in wood. "Well, what happened to her, if you don't mind my asking?" "Smallpox," Ezra said. 1870 winter outbreak. It swept through her people's camp like wildfire. I tried everything I knew, but it wasn't enough. She died first. Our daughter, Little Hawk, she held on for 3 more days. I think she was trying to stay for me, but in the end, she couldn't fight it either." "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered. "So am I," Ezra said. "Every day I'm sorry, but carrying this stick, it helps. Reminds me that love existed, that for a time I wasn't alone, that my life meant something to someone." They reached the small house Sarah shared with her father. Lamplight glowed warm in the windows. Ezra helped Sarah up the 2 steps to the porch, a nightly ritual they had developed. "Thank you," Sarah said, "for the lesson, for walking me home, for everything. You're doing good work," Ezra replied. "Better than most students I've taught. You've got natural instincts. You just needed someone to help you trust them. You've taught others." Sarah asked, curious. "Long time ago," Ezra said, and didn't elaborate. There was something in his voice that suggested whole chapters of his life he wasn't ready to share yet. Sarah wanted to ask more, wanted to know everything about this man who had appeared in her life, like an answer to a question she hadn't known how to ask. But she had learned that Ezra revealed himself slowly, in layers, and pushing too hard would only make him retreat. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked instead. "Same time," he confirmed. He touched his hat brim. "Good night, Miss Bennet." "Sarah," she said. "You can call me Sarah." Something softened in his expression. "Sarah, good night then." He walked away into the gathering darkness, his walking stick tapping a steady rhythm, the carved symbols catching the last light of day. Sarah watched him until he disappeared, then wheeled herself inside to where her father was preparing supper. "You're smiling," James observed. "Am I?" Sarah touched her face, surprised. "You are." "It's good to see." James set plates on the table. "Ezra's a good man. Complicated but good." "I know," Sarah said. And she did know. She knew it in the way he taught her without condescension, spoke to her without pity, saw her without the filter of her disability. She knew it in the way he carried his grief without letting it make him cruel, the way he had chosen isolation rather than inflict his pain on others, and the way he was slowly, carefully, letting himself be part of the world again. What she didn't know yet was that up in the hills, Clem Dawson was writing a letter to his brother. A letter that would bring violence down on Redemption Creek like a summer storm. A letter that would test everything Ezra had been teaching her and reveal truths that would change all their lives forever. But that storm was still days away. For now there was just supper with her father, the memory of Ezra's rare smile, and the growing sense that she was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who could face whatever came next. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Ezra came every morning for lessons with Sarah, stayed to help James with difficult projects at the forge, and spent his evenings at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, reading or sitting on the porch, watching the town settle into night. He had not returned to his mountain cabin, though no one quite knew why. Sarah flourished under his tutelage. The shy, careful girl who had rolled into the Dusty Rose Saloon a month ago was transforming into someone else, someone who held her head high, who met challenges directly, who refused to apologize for taking up space in the world. People noticed. They greeted her differently now, with a respect that had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with recognizing strength. One afternoon, as Sarah worked through a particularly challenging defensive sequence, Ezra paused the lesson and sat on a crate nearby. He had brought something with him today, a small bundle wrapped in oiled cloth, and he held it now, turning it over in his hands as if deciding something. "I want to show you something," he said finally. "Something I haven't shown anyone in a long time." Sarah wheeled closer, curious. Ezra unwrapped the bundle carefully, revealing a pressed wildflower. It was perfectly preserved, its purple petals still vibrant against the green stem, mounted between 2 thin pieces of glass, bound with leather strips. "Alpine aster," he said softly. "Grows in the high meadows above my cabin. Only blooms for a few weeks in summer, and only if the conditions are exactly right. Not too wet, not too dry, enough sun but not too much." He held it up to the light. "My wife used to gather them. She said they proved that beautiful things could survive in harsh places. You just had to be strong enough to bloom where you were planted." He extended the flower toward Sarah. "I want you to have this." Sarah's breath caught. "Ezra, I can't. This is yours." "Your wife's. Which is why I can give it to you," he said simply. "She would have liked you, Sarah, would have recognized the strength in you the same way I do. And she would want this flower to go to someone who understands what it means, someone who's blooming despite everything trying to make her wilt." Sarah took the flower with trembling hands, feeling the weight of the gift. It wasn't just a pressed flower. It was trust. It was his past meeting his present. It was him saying that she mattered, that what was growing between them mattered. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll treasure it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Then Ezra began to talk, really talk, in a way he hadn't before. He told her about his life before the mountains, about being a cavalry scout, tracking hostile parties across hostile terrain, about meeting his wife, White Dove, during a peace negotiation between her people and the army, about how she had looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes and seen past the uniform to the man beneath. "I wasn't supposed to fall in love with her," he said. "Fraternization with the natives, that's what they called it. Like love was something you could forbid with a regulation." He smiled at the memory. "But I did fall. Fell hard and fast and completely. And when the army gave me a choice, her or my career, I chose her without hesitation." "You gave up everything for her," Sarah said softly. "I gave up nothing for her," Ezra corrected. "I gave up things that didn't matter to keep the one thing that did. We built a life together, a good life. She taught me her language, her customs, how to read the land the way her people did. I taught her to read English, to write, to understand the strange ways of the white world. And your daughter." Ezra's expression grew distant. "Little Hawk, she was perfect. Had her mother's eyes and my stubborn streak. Smart as a whip, curious about everything. She was 10 years old when the sickness came." His voice grew rough. "I was a scout. I'd tracked men across 3 territories, survived battles and ambushes and impossible odds. But I couldn't track down a cure for smallpox. Couldn't fight off disease with a knife or a gun. All my skills, all my experience, useless." Sarah reached out and placed her hand on his arm. He looked down at her hand, then at her face, and something in his expression cracked open. "I ran after they died," he admitted. "Ran from the grief, from the memories, from everyone who looked at me with pity. Ran all the way up into those mountains and built a cabin where no one could find me. Told myself I was choosing solitude. But really, I was just choosing to stop feeling. What changed? Sarah asked gently. You did, Ezra said simply. I came into that saloon to get supplies, saw Clem Dawson tormenting you, and something woke up inside me. Something I thought had died with my family. The part of me that gave a damn about other people. The part that couldn't just walk past injustice and pretend it wasn't happening. He turned to face her fully. These past weeks, teaching you, working with your father, being part of a community again, it's reminded me that I'm still alive. That maybe my life still has purpose beyond just surviving until I die. I'm glad you came down from your mountain, Sarah said softly. So am I, Ezra replied. And the way he looked at her when he said it made her heart do something complicated in her chest. The moments stretched between them, full of things unsaid but understood. Then James's voice called from inside the smithy, breaking the spell. Sarah! Customer for you! Sarah reluctantly wheeled away to handle whatever accounting matter needed attention. But she carried the pressed wildflower with her, held carefully in her lap like the precious gift it was. The customer turned out to be Thomas Greer, a wiry man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. He'd ridden into town that morning and gone straight to the sheriff's office, emerging 20 minutes later with a disgusted expression that suggested his opinion of Sheriff Perkins matched everyone else's. Miss Bennett, he said, tipping his hat. I'm looking for a man named Ezra Stone. Heard he's been staying in town. Your father wouldn't happen to know where I might find him. Sarah felt a chill run through her. A marshal looking for Ezra could mean nothing good. What do you want with him? Greer studied her carefully. That's between me and him, miss. But I assure you, my intentions are peaceful. I'm an old friend. We rode together many years ago, Sarah. Ezra's voice came from behind her. He had appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he looked at the marshal. It's all right. I know, Thomas. The two men faced each other for a long moment. Then Greer broke into a wide smile and crossed the distance between them, extending his hand. Ezra Stone, I'll be damned. I thought I'd never see you again. Ezra shook his hand, and there was genuine warmth in the gesture. Thomas Greer, still wearing that badge, I see. Someone has to keep things civilized, Greer said. You going to invite me for a drink, or are we going to stand here making small talk all afternoon? They went to the Dusty Rose, Ezra throwing a reassuring glance at Sarah before he left. She watched them go, her mind full of questions. Who was Thomas Greer? How did he know Ezra? And why did the arrival of an old friend feel like the beginning of something dangerous? James came to stand beside her. That's the territorial marshal, he said quietly, based out of Helena. If he's here, it's not for a social call. In the Dusty Rose, Ezra and Thomas sat at a corner table while Margaret poured them whiskey. The saloon was quiet at this hour, just a few regulars nursing drinks and playing cards. You look good, Thomas said, studying his old friend. Better than you did last time I saw you. That was, 6 years ago? 7, Ezra corrected. You rode up to my cabin trying to convince me to come back to work, and you told me to go to hell, Thomas finished with a grin. Very politely, but the message was clear. I wasn't ready then, Ezra said, and now? Ezra was quiet for a moment, considering. Now, maybe I'm starting to think there's more to life than hiding from it. Thomas took a sip of his whiskey, then set the glass down carefully. I'm glad to hear that. Because I've got a problem, and you're one of the few men I know who might be able to help me with it. I'm not a marshal anymore, Thomas. No, but you're still Ezra Stone, the man they called the Stone Judge, the man who cleaned up half the territory single-handedly. Ezra grimaced. That was a long time ago. Different life. Skills don't fade, old friend. And right now, I need someone with your particular set of skills. Thomas leaned forward, his voice dropping. There's a gang operating in the territory, led by a man named Jacob Dawson. You heard of him? Ezra's expression darkened. I've heard. Then you know he's bad news. Him and his crew have been hitting towns from here to the Canadian border. Bank robberies, cattle theft, murder. They're smart about it. Hit fast, scatter, regroup somewhere else. I've been tracking them for 8 months, but I'm always 3 steps behind. What does this have to do with Redemption Creek? Jacob Dawson has a brother, Thomas said. Goes by Clem, and according to my sources, Clem's been spending a lot of time in this town lately. He pulled out a piece of paper, a wanted poster, and slid it across the table. This looked familiar. Ezra looked at the poster, at the rough sketch of Clem Dawson's face, at the list of crimes beneath it. His jaw tightened. "We've had words," Ezra said carefully. "About a month ago, he was bothering a young woman. I persuaded him to stop. That would be Miss Bennett, I'm guessing. The young woman in the wheelchair." At Ezra's surprised look, Thomas smiled. "I'm a marshal, Ezra. I asked questions before I came looking for you. Seems you made quite an impression on this town. What's your point, Thomas?" "My point is that Clem Dawson doesn't take well to being humiliated. And word on the street is that he's sent for his brother. Jacob and his whole crew, 14 men in total, heading this way to settle a family grievance." Thomas's expression grew grave. "They'll be here within the week, Ezra. And when they come, they're not going to just want revenge on you. They're going to burn this whole town to the ground to make a point." Ezra felt something cold settle in his chest. "You're sure about this?" "As sure as I can be. I've got informants among the outlaw networks. One of them sent word 3 days ago." Jacob Dawson rode out of his hideout in the Bitterroots with 13 men, all heavily armed, heading southeast toward Redemption Creek. Thomas paused. "They're coming for you, old friend. And everyone here is going to be caught in the crossfire unless someone stops them." "Someone like me," Ezra said quietly. "Someone like us," Thomas corrected. "I didn't come here to ask you to face them alone. I came to ask if you'd stand with me. Like old times." Ezra looked around the saloon. He thought about Sarah, about James, about Margaret, and all the decent people who had made him feel like part of something again. He thought about running, going back up to his mountain, letting the storm pass him by. It would be easy. It would be safe. It would be wrong. "When do they arrive?" He asked. 4 days. "Maybe 5 if we're lucky." "Then we'd better get ready," Ezra said. He finished his whiskey and stood. "But first, I need to tell some people what's coming. They deserve to know." They found Sarah and James still at the smithy. Ezra explained everything, who Thomas was, who Jacob Dawson was, and what was heading toward Redemption Creek. He didn't sugarcoat it or try to minimize the danger. He told them the truth, plain and simple, and let them decide how to respond. James was quiet for a long time after Ezra finished. Then he said, "This is because of what happened at the saloon. Because you stood up for Sarah." "No," Ezra said firmly. "This is because Clem Dawson is a coward who can't handle being called out for his cruelty. This is because his brother is a killer who uses violence to solve problems. This would have happened eventually, with or without me. I just gave them an excuse sooner rather than later. Will you run?" Sarah asked quietly. "Go back to your mountain?" Ezra looked at her, at this young woman he had come to care for more than he wanted to admit. "Would you want me to?" "I'd want you to be safe," Sarah said. "But no, I wouldn't want you to run. That's not who you are." "No," Ezra agreed. "It's not." "Then we prepare," James said. He looked at Thomas. "You're a territorial marshal. Can't you bring in more men? Deputies?" "The nearest federal agents are 5 days away in Helena," Thomas said. "I sent a telegram before I left, but they won't get here in time. Right now it's me, Ezra, and whoever in this town is willing to stand with us." "I'll stand," James said without hesitation. "Papa, no," Sarah started. "Yes," James interrupted gently. "Sarah, this town is our home. These people are our neighbors. I'm not going to hide while good men fight to protect what matters." Sarah looked at her father, then at Ezra, then at Thomas. She felt fear coiling in her chest, but beneath it was something else, determination. "Then I'll stand too." "Sarah," Ezra began. "No," she said firmly. "You've spent 3 weeks teaching me to defend myself, teaching me that being in this chair doesn't make me helpless. Were those just words, Ezra? Or did you mean them?" Ezra looked at her for a long moment. "I meant every word. But this is different. This is war. All the more reason I should be part of it," Sarah said. "This is my town too. My fight too. You don't get to protect me by leaving me out." Ezra glanced at Thomas, who shrugged. "She's got spirit, I'll give her that." "She's got more than spirit," Ezra said quietly. "She's got courage. Real courage." He turned back to Sarah. "All right, but you do exactly what I tell you. No arguments, no improvisation. Agreed?" Agreed, Sarah said. That evening, Ezra and Thomas called a meeting at the church. They gathered everyone they could find, shopkeepers, miners, ranch hands, families. Even Margaret came, closing the dusty rows for the first time anyone could remember. Ezra stood at the front of the church and told them what was coming. He didn't try to inspire them with speeches or promises. He just told them the truth. A gang of killers was heading their way, and they had 4 days to decide what to do about it. "I won't lie to you," he said. "Some of you are going to want to leave, and that's your right. Pack up your families and go stay with relatives until this is over. I don't blame you. 14 armed men against a town of miners and merchants. Those aren't good odds. What about you?" Someone called from the back. "You going to run?" "No," Ezra said simply. "I'm going to fight." Because running doesn't solve anything. It just means the next town gets hit and the next one after that. Someone has to stand up and say enough. "Might as well be me." "You're not alone," Thomas added. "I'm a federal marshal and I'm staying. So's Mr. Bennett and anyone else who wants to defend their home." The church buzzed with frightened conversation. Families huddled together, debating. Some men stood up, ready to volunteer. Others looked at their wives and children and made different choices. In the end, 7 men agreed to stay and fight. 7 plus Ezra and Thomas made 9. Against 14 hardened killers, it wasn't enough. Everyone knew it wasn't enough, but it was what they had, and they would make it count. The next morning, while most of the town was still deciding between courage and common sense, something unexpected happened. A piece of faded paper appeared on the bulletin board outside the general store, drawing a crowd before breakfast was over. It was a wanted poster, but not one of the fresh ones Thomas carried. This was old, weathered, the ink faded to brown, and the face sketched on it, though younger and clean-shaven, was unmistakably Ezra Stone. Wanted, Ezra the Stone Judge, Stone Federal Marshal, Territory of Montana, for apprehension of outlaws and administration of justice, reward for information. Leading to his location, $500 offered by grateful citizens of 3 territories. Beneath the sketch was a list, not of crimes, but of accomplishments. 12 gangs broken, 47 outlaws brought to justice, towns from Butte to Bozeman made safe through his efforts. The poster was dated 1868, 15 years old, and it wasn't really a wanted poster at all. It was a testament. Someone had found it in an old trunk in the church basement. Mrs. Patterson, who had been going through donations, had recognized the face and brought it straight to the store. Within an hour, the whole town knew that the quiet mountain man living in their midst was a legend. Ezra saw the poster when he came to the general store for supplies. He stood looking at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. A crowd had gathered watching him, waiting to see how he'd react. "That was a different life," he said finally. "A different man. Is it true?" Old Mr. Henderson asked. "You were the Stone Judge?" "I was a marshal," Ezra said carefully. "I did my job." "That's all." "That's not all." Thomas Greer had come up beside him. "Don't diminish what you did, Ezra. You made the territory safe for decent people. You were the best lawman I ever served with." "Was," Ezra repeated. Past tense. "That man died with his family." "No, he didn't," Sarah said. She had wheeled up to the crowd, her voice clear and firm. "He just hid for a while, but he's still in there. Still the man who couldn't walk past injustice. Still the man who taught me to stand up for myself. Still the Stone Judge, whether you want to admit it or not." Ezra looked at her, something complicated moving across his face. Then he turned back to the crowd. "Jacob Dawson and his gang will be here in 3 days," he said. "Maybe 4. That gives us time to prepare, but not much. If you're staying to fight, meet me at the Dusty Rose in 1 hour. If you're leaving, go now and go fast." He walked away, leaving the crowd to their whispers and their decisions. Sarah followed him, catching up halfway to the saloon. "You're angry," she observed. "I'm not angry," Ezra said. Then more honestly, "I'm uncomfortable. I spent 15 years trying to forget the Stone Judge, trying to be someone else. And now here he is, staring at me from a piece of old paper." "Maybe you needed to remember him," Sarah suggested. "Maybe we all did. Because right now, we don't need a grieving widower or a mountain hermit. We need a man who knows how to fight. A man who knows how to win. Ezra stopped walking and turned to face her. What if I've forgotten how? What if 15 years of hiding made me soft? What if people die because I'm not the man I used to be? Then they die fighting for their home, Sarah said, which is better than dying without fighting at all. And Ezra, you haven't forgotten. I've watched you teach. I've seen how your mind works, how you think 10 steps ahead. The stone judge is still in there. You just have to let him out. They stood there in the middle of the street, the morning sun warm on their faces. Around them, the town was waking up, making choices, preparing for what was coming. You have a lot of faith in me, Ezra said quietly. Yes, Sarah agreed. I do. An hour later, 11 people gathered in the Dusty Rose Saloon. Ezra and Thomas, James Bennett, Sarah, despite several people's objections, Margaret Hayes, who refused to abandon her business, 3 ranch hands from the Double J spread who had families in town, a young miner named Colby who'd lost his brother to Clem Dawson's casual violence 6 months ago, and old Pete, the town drunk, who surprised everyone by showing up sober and armed with a rifle that looked older than he was, letting the storm pass him by. It would be easy. It would be safe. It would be wrong. When do they arrive? He asked. 4 days. Maybe 5 if we're lucky. Then we'd better get ready, Ezra said. He finished his whiskey and stood. But first I need to tell some people what's coming. They deserve to know. This is what we have, Thomas said, surveying the group. Not what we want, but what we've got. Ezra's going to tell you how we use it. Ezra stood at the front of the room, and as he began to talk, something shifted in his bearing. The uncertain mountain man faded, and in his place stood someone else, someone harder, more focused, more dangerous. The stone judge. First thing you need to understand, he said, is that we're not going to win this fight with courage or luck. We're going to win it with preparation and strategy. Jacob Dawson has more men and more guns, but we have something he doesn't. We know this town, and we have time to prepare it. He spread a hand-drawn map of Redemption Creek on the table. They'll come in from the north down the main road. That's the easiest approach, and men like Jacob don't do complicated when simple works. So we're going to turn that road into a killing ground. For the next hour, Ezra laid out his plan. It was brutal in its simplicity and brilliant in its execution. They would use the buildings as cover, create overlapping fields of fire, set traps that would channel the gang into predetermined kill zones. He assigned positions based on skills. The ranch hands who could shoot got the rooftops. Old Pete, whose hands were steady despite his age, got the church bell tower with a long rifle. Margaret and Sarah would coordinate ammunition resupply and tend to the wounded. What about me? James asked. You're our anvil, Ezra said. You stay at the forge. It's stone defensible, and anyone who makes it past our first line will run right into you. You're our last line of defense, James nodded, understanding. If the gang got as far as his smithy, things had gone very wrong. But if they did, he'd make them pay for every foot of ground. What about Clem? Sarah asked. He knows the town, too. Won't he warn his brother about any traps? Clem doesn't know what we're planning because we haven't done it yet, Ezra said. And besides, he smiled cold and calculating. Clem's going to be busy. That afternoon, Thomas Greer walked into Clem Dawson's mining camp with an arrest warrant. He had 4 ranch hands with him, all armed, all looking like they'd rather shoot than talk. Clem Dawson, Thomas announced, his voice carrying across the camp, you're under arrest for assault, theft and disturbing the peace. You can come easy or you can come hard, but you're coming. Clem stood up from where he'd been sitting by his tent. His crew reached for weapons, but Thomas's men already had theirs drawn. You got no authority here, Clem spat. I'm a territorial marshal, Thomas said, tapping his badge. I've got authority everywhere in Montana Territory. Now are you going to walk to the jail or do we drag you? It was a tense moment, balanced on the edge of violence, but Clem wasn't stupid. 5 guns against 4, and his men were drunk while Thomas's were sober and alert. He could fight, but he'd probably die. This is about that mountain man, Clem said. He put you up to this. This is about you breaking the law, Thomas said. Everything else is just details. Now let's go. They took Clem to the jail, such as it was, 2 cells in the back of the sheriff's office that Sheriff Perkins barely used. Perkins himself was nowhere to be found. He'd left town the day after Thomas arrived, suddenly remembering urgent business. The first shots came from the rooftops, carefully aimed rifle fire that dropped 2 of Jacob's men before they could react. The gang scattered, some diving for cover behind water troughs, others trying to control spooked horses. Return fire erupted, wild and undisciplined, bullets chipping wood and shattering windows. But Ezra's plan was already working. The gang had ridden straight into the killing ground, exactly where he wanted them. Now they were pinned, exposed, taking fire from multiple angles with nowhere to run. Jacob Dawson bellowed orders, trying to organize his men, but the careful ambush was breaking their cohesion. 3 more went down in the first minute, then 4. The defenders, shooting from cover and following Ezra's instructions, were devastatingly effective. But wars are not won in the first minute. Jacob, recognizing the trap, made a hard choice. He ordered half his remaining men to charge the buildings, to break the ambush by getting close where rifles couldn't track. It was brutal tactics, trading lives for position, but it worked. 4 men died making the charge, but 3 made it to cover. And suddenly the defenders were fighting in close quarters, where the outlaws' experience with violence gave them an advantage. The battle devolved into chaos. Gunfire echoed off buildings. Men shouted and cursed and died. Smoke from black powder hung in the air like fog. At the forge, Sarah heard the sounds of combat and fought the urge to wheel herself out to see what was happening. Her job was here, keeping ammunition organized, having bandages ready for the wounded. It felt helpless, staying behind while others fought, but she trusted Ezra's plan. Then the forge door burst open, and one of Jacob's men stumbled in, his gun drawn, his face twisted with pain and rage. He had been shot in the shoulder and was looking for somewhere to hide, somewhere to regroup. He saw Sarah and grinned, a horrible expression.
Well,
"What do we have here?" Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. All those lessons with Ezra, all that training, it came down to this moment. The man was between her and the door. He had a gun. She had. Her hand closed on the heavy forge hammer sitting on the table beside her. James's hammer, the one he used for shaping iron. "Stay back," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The outlaw laughed. "Or what? You going to roll over my foot?" He started toward her, the gun loose in his good hand. Sarah waited until he was close, until he was reaching for her with his uninjured arm, until he thought he had won. Then she swung the hammer with every ounce of upper body strength she had developed over 3 weeks of training. It caught him on the side of the knee with a sickening crunch. The man screamed and went down. Sarah didn't hesitate. Ezra had taught her not to hesitate. She swung again, this time at his gun hand. The weapon went flying. In third swing, and the man was unconscious, no longer a threat. Sarah sat there, breathing hard, the hammer heavy in her hands. She had done it. She had defended herself. She wasn't helpless, but there was no time to process the moment. The battle was still raging outside. 20 minutes into the fight, Ezra realized something was wrong. The gang was fighting too smart, adapting too quickly to his tactics. Someone was directing them, someone who understood strategy and knew how to counter an ambush. Then he saw him, a 13th man who had hung back when the gang first rode in, who was now positioned at the far end of town, out of the main combat zone, watching everything with field glasses and sending hand signals to Jacob. That was the missing man from Thomas's count. And he was the reason the gang wasn't breaking, despite heavy casualties. Ezra made a decision. He left his position on the roof and worked his way through the buildings, using the chaos of battle as cover. It took him 5 minutes to reach a position where he had a clear line on the mystery tactician. He raised his rifle, sighting carefully. It was a long shot, maybe 200 yards. Not impossible, but not easy either. His finger touched the trigger, then the man turned just slightly, and Ezra saw his face. The rifle almost fell from Ezra's hands. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But there was no mistaking that face, those features. Even after so many years, the man directing Jacob Dawson's gang was Michael Stone, Ezra's younger brother, the brother he thought had died 25 years ago during a raid on a wagon train. The brother he had mourned and buried and tried to forget. The brother who was now somehow alive and working with outlaws to destroy a town. Ezra's mind reeled. How? Why? What had happened to the boy he remembered, the laughing, earnest youth who had wanted nothing more than to be a schoolteacher? The moment of shock almost cost him his life. One of the outlaws, spotting him, fired. The bullet missed by inches, snapping Ezra out of his paralysis. He ducked back into cover, his thoughts racing. Michael was alive. His brother was alive. And right now, his brother was helping murder innocent people. Ezra had to stop him. But how did you fight someone you'd once loved? How did you pull the trigger on family? He didn't have time to figure it out. The battle was reaching a critical point. Jacob's men had broken into 2 buildings and were threatening to flank the defenders. Thomas was pinned down at the saloon. The ranch hands on the rooftops were running low on ammunition. Ezra forced himself to focus. He could deal with Michael later. Right now, he had a town to save. He moved back toward the main fight, his rifle ready. As he ran across an alley, he nearly collided with James, who was helping a wounded ranch hand back toward the forge. "Ezra!" James gasped. "We need to fall back. There's too many of them." "Hold your position," Ezra ordered. "Trust the plan. We're winning, even if it doesn't feel like it." But were they? Ezra counted quickly. 8 of the original 14 outlaws were down, dead or wounded. But they had lost 2 defenders and 3 more were injured. The numbers were evening out, and in a fair fight, the outlaws' experience would win. They needed to break the gang's morale, make them retreat. And there was only one way to do that. Ezra had to take down Jacob Dawson. He spotted the gang leader taking cover behind an overturned wagon, directing fire, still trying to organize his men. Getting to him would mean crossing 40 feet of open ground under fire. Suicide by any reasonable calculation, but Ezra had stopped making reasonable calculations the moment he walked into the dusty rows, Saloon, and saw Clem Dawson tormenting Sarah. He had stopped being reasonable when he decided that some things were worth dying for. He broke from cover and ran. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet. Something tugged at his sleeve. Another round burned across his ribs. But he kept moving, kept his eyes on Jacob, kept his purpose clear. He cleared the distance in seconds that felt like hours and dove behind the wagon just as Jacob turned to face him. They were suddenly face to face, separated by 3 feet and a lifetime of different choices. "You must be Stone," Jacob said, surprisingly calm. "I am." "Hell of a run." "Most men wouldn't have made it. Most men wouldn't have tried." Jacob smiled, a cold expression. "I respect that. But you killed 6 of my boys. Can't let that stand." They both moved at once. Jacob's gun came up. Ezra's hand shot out, grabbing Jacob's wrist, forcing the barrel away. Jacob's other hand went for a knife. They grappled, close and brutal, 2 men fighting for survival. Ezra was older, but he was also harder, shaped by 15 years of mountain living and a lifetime of combat. Jacob was younger, bigger, but he had gotten lazy, used to his men doing the hard work while he gave orders. The fight was over in less than a minute. Ezra got the knife away, twisted Jacob's gun arm until something cracked, and put the outlaw on his back with a knee on his chest and a gun to his head. "It's over," Ezra said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Jacob Dawson is finished. Anyone still fighting dies. Anyone who drops their weapons walks away." The gunfire stuttered, then stopped. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader defeated, made their choices. 2 tried to run and were cut down. The other 3 dropped their weapons and raised their hands. The Battle of Redemption Creek was over. The defenders emerged from their positions, moving cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Men embraced, relieved to be alive. The wounded were carried to the forge, where Sarah waited with bandages and water. Thomas Greer approached Ezra, a bleeding cut on his forehead but otherwise intact. "Fine work, old friend." "Fine work," Ezra barely heard him. His eyes were scanning the far end of town, looking for Michael. But his brother was gone, vanished in the chaos, leaving only questions behind. "Ezra?" Thomas asked, concerned. "You all right?" "Yeah," Ezra lied. "Just give me a minute." He walked away from the carnage, away from the celebrating defenders, toward the spot where he had seen Michael. There was nothing there now, just empty ground, and the distant mountains where a man could disappear if he knew how. Sarah found him there 10 minutes later. She had wheeled herself through the battle. "We need to evacuate," Thomas said. "Get everyone out before—" "No," Ezra interrupted. "We can't evacuate in 2 hours. Too many people, too few horses. They'd catch us on the road and it would be a slaughter." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We fought them off once. We can do it again. Can we?" Thomas asked. "Half our fighters are wounded. We're low on ammunition, and this time they know what we're capable of. They'll come prepared. Then we don't fight the same battle," Ezra said. He turned to the scout. "You said they're coming from the northwest?" "Yes, sir. That means they'll approach through the canyon pass. Narrow ground, steep walls." Ezra's mind was working again, seeing the terrain, calculating options. "If we can get there first, we can make that canyon into a trap. You want to meet them outside the town?" Thomas looked skeptical. "That gives up all our defensive advantages. It also keeps the battle away from civilians," Ezra pointed out. "And it lets us choose the ground. In town, they can spread out, use buildings for cover. In the canyon, they have to come at us in a narrow line. 8 men could hold that pass against 20 if they were positioned right. Do we have 8 men who can still fight?" Ezra did a quick mental count. Thomas and himself. James Bennett, who was bruised but determined. 3 of the ranch hands, who had recovered enough from minor wounds. Old Pete, still sober and still spoiling for another fight. Young Colby, the miner. "We have 7, Ezra said. "It'll have to be enough." 8, Sarah said from the doorway. They all turned to see her there, her jaw set in a way that suggested she was not open to argument. "You're forgetting me." "Sarah, no," Ezra began. "Yes," she interrupted. "I proved in the last battle that I can handle myself. I took down one of Jacob's men while you were all fighting outside. I've been training for weeks, and you need every gun you can get." "She's right," Thomas said reluctantly. "We can't afford to leave anyone behind who can fight." Ezra wanted to argue, wanted to protect her, wanted to keep her safe from what was coming. But he looked at her face, at the determination and courage there, and he realized that protecting her meant trusting her. It meant believing in the strength he had helped her discover. "All right," he said finally, "but you stay in the best cover we can find. And if I tell you to fall back, you fall back. No arguments." "No arguments," Sarah agreed. They had 90 minutes to prepare. Ezra led them to the canyon, a natural choke point where the trail from the northwest squeezed between 2 rock walls before opening into the valley where Redemption Creek sat. It was perfect defensive terrain, height, cover, and limited approaches. Ezra positioned his fighters with the same tactical brilliance he had shown in town. The ranch hands on the high rocks with rifles. Thomas and James at the narrow point with shotguns. Old Pete further back with his long rifle. Colby mobile, ready to reinforce wherever needed. And Sarah, tucked into a protected niche with a clear line of fire down the canyon and enough ammunition to hold off an army. "Remember," Ezra told them as they took their positions, "we're not trying to kill them all. We're trying to make them reconsider. Break their momentum, make them pay for every foot of ground, and maybe they'll decide Redemption Creek isn't worth the cost. And if they don't," James asked, "then we make them pay anyway," Ezra said simply. He took his own position at the highest point, where he could see the entire battlefield and direct the defense, and where he knew Michael would see him, would know exactly who was waiting. The wait was agonizing. Every minute felt stretched thin, pulled taut like a rope about to snap. The defenders checked their weapons, adjusted their positions, tried to control their breathing and their fear. Some prayed. Others just stared at the empty canyon, waiting for it to fill with violence. Sarah sat in her protected niche, her rifle across her lap, and thought about all the paths that had led her to this moment. The accident that had taken her legs, her mother's death, years of learning to navigate a world that didn't think she mattered. Meeting Ezra, who had taught her she was wrong about that. The first battle, where she had discovered her own courage. And now this, a second battle, defending not just her town, but her future. Because if they lost here, there would be no San Francisco, no Dr. Michaels, no chance to walk again, no future with Ezra. She wouldn't let that happen. The sound came first, hoofbeats, lots of them echoing off the canyon walls. Then they appeared, riding in formation, a mixed force that made no sense until you understood that hate could unite anyone. 8 Shoshone warriors, their faces painted, their weapons a mix of traditional and modern. 12 white outlaws, hard men who had chosen violence as a way of life. And leading them all, riding at the front on a paint horse, was Michael Stone. Ezra saw his brother clearly for the first time in 25 years. Michael was older, harder, his face marked by weather and violence. But it was unmistakably him. The same nose, the same jawline, the same way of sitting a horse that Ezra remembered from childhood. But everything else was different. The gentle boy who had loved books was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. Michael's eyes swept the canyon, reading the terrain, spotting the ambush immediately. He raised his hand and his force stopped. "Ezra!" Michael's voice carried clearly in the still air. "I know you're up there. Come down and talk to me. Or are you too afraid to face your own brother?" Ezra stood slowly, making himself visible on the high rock. For a long moment, the two brothers just looked at each other across the canyon, across 25 years of separation and pain and unanswered questions. "Michael," Ezra said, his voice rough with emotion. How are you alive? Does it matter?" Michael called back. "The boy you knew died in that wagon raid. What survived what they made me into, that's someone else. The Shoshone took you, raised you, saved me," Michael corrected. "From a bullet in my chest and a world that had already killed our parents. They took me in, healed me, taught me their ways. I became one of them. I was happy, Ezra. For 15 years I was happy. What happened?" Michael's face twisted with pain and rage. "Soldiers happened. White soldiers who didn't care that I was white too. Didn't care that my Shoshone family had done nothing wrong. They came in the winter when we were weak. They burned the village. Killed everyone, my wife, my children, the people who had given me a life when mine was taken away." His voice broke. "I tried to stop them. Told them I was white, that these were peaceful people. And you know what they said, Ezra? They said I was a traitor, that I deserved to die with the savages. Michael." Ezra's voice was thick with grief. He understood now, understood the hate that had twisted his brother. Michael had lost 2 families, 2 worlds. No wonder he had broken. "I survived," Michael continued, "just like I survived the wagon raid. And I decided that if both worlds wanted to destroy each other, I'd help them do it. I'd use the whites against the natives against the whites. I'd watch it all burn, and maybe in the burning I'd find some kind of peace." "That's not peace," Ezra said. "That's just more death, more pain, more families destroyed, like ours was destroyed." Michael shot back. "You think you're better than me, Ezra? You ran to a mountain to hide from your grief. At least I faced mine. At least I did something with it. You became the thing that killed your family," Ezra said, and his voice was gentle now, full of sorrow. "You became the violence, the hate, the senseless destruction. Michael, our brother, the real Michael, would be heartbroken to see what you've become." Something flickered in Michael's expression. Pain, maybe, or the ghost of who he used to be. But it was quickly buried under the weight of his rage. "I didn't come here to talk philosophy," Michael said. "I came here to finish what Jacob started, to burn Redemption Creek to the ground. And you can't stop me. Look at your forces, Ezra. 7 exhausted defenders against 20 fresh fighters. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of luck. Maybe," Ezra admitted. "But we're not out of determination. This town is worth defending. The people here are worth defending. And I won't let you hurt them, Michael, even if it means fighting you." Michael's face hardened. "Then fight we will. I'm giving you one chance, brother. Walk away, take your people and go. I'll let you live. I owe you that much for the boy we both used to be. I can't do that. Then you're a fool." Michael raised his arm, preparing to signal the attack. "Wait!" Sarah's voice rang out, clear and strong. She had wheeled herself into view, positioned where both forces could see her. You think you're fighting for justice, Michael Stone. You think you're avenging your family? But all you're doing is creating more orphans, more widows, more people who will grow up hating like you do. Is that really what your Shoshone family would have wanted? Is that the legacy they deserve? Michael stared at her, this young woman in a wheelchair who dared to challenge him. What do you know about loss? More than you think, Sarah said. I lost my mother. I lost the use of my legs. I lost years of my life to fear and pain. But I didn't let it make me cruel. I didn't let it make me into something my mother would be ashamed of. And your Shoshone family, the people who saved you and loved you, would they be proud of what you're doing now? The question hung in the air. For just a moment, Michael looked uncertain. Looked like the boy he had been might still be in there somewhere. Buried deep, but not quite dead. Then one of the outlaws, impatient for action, raised his rifle toward Sarah and Ezra Stone. Seeing his brother's companion take aim at the woman he loved, made his choice. He fired. The shot echoed through the canyon like thunder, and the battle began. 3 days after the battle, Redemption Creek was still finding its balance. The dead had been buried, the wounded were recovering, and the town had begun the work of repairing the damage. Buildings with bullet holes, burned sections of boardwalk, the general store's shattered window. Physical scars that would heal with time and labor. The emotional scars would take longer. Sarah sat at her usual corner table in the dusty rows, working through Margaret's accounts. The saloon had reopened the day after the battle, and life was slowly returning to normal. But normal felt different now. The men who drank here had fought together, bled together. There was a bond that hadn't existed before, forged in violence but built on something deeper. The shared knowledge that they had stood up when it mattered. Ezra entered the saloon just after noon, his face drawn and tired. He hadn't been sleeping well since the battle. Sarah knew, because she hadn't been sleeping well either. They were both carrying things they hadn't fully processed yet. You look terrible, Sarah said, as he sat down across from her. Thank you. You always know just what to say, but there was no heat in his words, just exhausted affection. Have you heard anything? Sarah asked carefully. They both knew what she meant. Any word about Michael Stone? Nothing, Ezra said. It's like he vanished. Thomas has riders out, but... He shrugged helplessly. Michael knows how to disappear. I taught him years ago. If he doesn't want to be found, he won't be. Maybe that's for the best, Sarah suggested. Maybe you both need time before what? Before I have to decide whether to arrest my own brother. Before I have to choose between law and family. Ezra rubbed his face. I keep thinking about what he must have gone through, how he survived that wagon train raid, what turned him into whatever he is now. And I can't make sense of any of it. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. Then stop trying to make sense of it right now. Focus on what's in front of you. The town needs repairs. People need reassurance. And she paused, gathering her courage. I need to talk to you about something. Ezra looked up, really looked at her for the first time since entering. He saw the leather pouch on the table, the one filled with gold. His gold. Sarah, I want to go to San Francisco, she said quickly before she could lose her nerve. I want to see Dr. Michaels. I want to find out if I can walk again. But she squeezed his hand. I don't want to go alone. I want you to come with me. Ezra was quiet for a long moment. Your father already said yes. He said it's past time I saw something beyond Redemption Creek, and he trusts you to keep me safe. Sarah's voice softened. Ezra, I know you have things to figure out. I know your brother being alive changes everything. But maybe we both need to get away for a while. To a place where we're not the mountain man and the girl in the wheelchair. Where we can just be us. And if the treatment doesn't work, Ezra asked gently, then it doesn't work and I come home knowing I tried, Sarah said firmly. But either way, I want you there. Because you're the one who taught me I was strong enough to try in the first place. Before Ezra could respond, Thomas Greer burst into the saloon, his expression grim. Ezra, we have a problem. They followed Thomas outside to where a rider was dismounting from a lathered horse. It was one of the scouts Thomas had posted, and his face was pale with urgency. "Marshal," the scout said, breathing hard. "There's a group heading this way. 15, maybe 20 men, heavily armed, coming from the northwest." Ezra felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Jacob's gang is finished." "Who? It's not Jacob's gang," the scout interrupted. "Or at least not all of them. There's outlaws, yeah, but also—" He paused, struggling with what he'd seen. "There's Shoshone warriors with them. And leading the whole group is a white man matching the description of Michael Stone." The world seemed to tilt. Ezra grabbed the scout's shoulder. "You're sure? Shoshone warriors riding with outlaws?" "I'm sure. I counted 8 natives, all painted for war. The rest are whites, rough types. And they're not coming slow and careful. They're coming fast, like they've got a purpose." Thomas turned to Ezra. "What do you think this means?" Ezra's mind was racing. Michael, alive and somehow commanding a mixed force of natives and outlaws. It made no sense. His brother had always been gentle, scholarly, interested in books and learning. How had he become this? Unless— A horrible thought occurred to Ezra. What if Michael had been with the Shoshone all these years? What if the wagon train raid hadn't killed him but taken him? The Shoshone sometimes adopted captives, especially children. If Michael had been raised by them, had become one of them, but that still didn't explain the outlaws. Didn't explain why he'd helped Jacob Dawson attack Redemption Creek. How long until they arrive? Ezra asked. 2 hours. Maybe 3. Ezra turned to Thomas. "We need to talk to Clem now." In the jail, Clem Dawson sat on his cot, nursing bruises and his wounded pride. He looked up with a sneer when Ezra and Thomas entered. "Come to gloat?" he asked. "Come for answers," Ezra said flatly. "There's another force heading toward town, led by the man who helped your brother during the battle." "Who is he?" Clem's sneer faded, replaced by something that might have been fear. "You don't want to mess with him. That's Michael the Ghost. He's not right in the head. Jacob hired him to plan the attack on this town, but even Jacob was scared of him. Why? Because he hates. That's all he does is hate. Hates the white man for what they did to his adopted people. Hates the Shoshone for not being able to save his white family. Hates everyone and everything, and the only time he's happy is when he's hurting people." Clem leaned forward. "If he's coming back, it's not for me. It's to finish what Jacob started. And this time he won't make the mistake of underestimating you." Ezra felt sick. This couldn't be Michael. His gentle, bookish little brother couldn't have become this creature of hate and violence. But the evidence kept pointing in that direction. "We need to evacuate," Thomas said. "Get everyone out before—" Ezra's bullet took the outlaw in the shoulder, spinning him away from Sarah and dropping him from his horse. But that single shot was like a match to dry tinder. It ignited everything. Michael's forces charged forward into the canyon, and Ezra's defenders opened fire from their positions. The narrow confines that Ezra had chosen worked exactly as planned. The attackers couldn't spread out, couldn't use their numbers effectively. They were funneled into a killing ground, where every shot from the defenders found targets. But Michael was smart. As smart as Ezra, maybe smarter. He immediately split his force, sending the Shoshone warriors up the canyon walls to flank the defenders while the outlaws pressed forward, using their horses as mobile cover and returning fire with disciplined volleys. "They're climbing," one of the ranch hands shouted, pointing at the warriors scaling the rocks with impossible speed. "Fall back to secondary positions," Ezra ordered. He had anticipated this, had prepared fallback points that would deny the high ground to flankers. But it meant giving up their best positions sooner than he wanted. The defenders moved with practiced efficiency, retreating to their prepared positions while maintaining suppressing fire. Thomas and James held the narrows, their shotguns devastating at close range. 3 outlaws went down trying to push through, their horses panicking in the confined space, adding to the chaos. Sarah fired carefully from her protected niche, each shot aimed and deliberate. She wasn't trying to be a hero, wasn't trying to match the volume of fire from the experienced fighters. She was doing exactly what Ezra had taught her, picking her moments, making every shot count, staying alive. One of the Shoshone warriors reached the top of the canyon wall, directly above Old Pete's position. The warrior raised his rifle, taking aim at the old man's back. Sarah saw him. swung her rifle, fired. The warrior dropped, and old Pete spun around, saw what had almost happened, and raised a hand to Sarah in salute before turning back to his own fight. Sarah felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. She had just killed a man, not wounded, not driven off, killed. The warrior wasn't moving, would never move again, but there was no time to process that. No time for guilt or doubt. The battle was raging, and her friends needed her. The fight lasted 20 brutal minutes. 20 minutes of gunfire and screaming, of men dying and others taking their places, of tactics and counter-tactics as two brothers who understood warfare tried to outthink each other. Michael was pushing hard, throwing his forces against Ezra's defenses like waves against a cliff. But the cliff was holding barely, and with each wave, Michael's force was diminishing. He had started with 20. Now he was down to 14, then 12, then 10. But Ezra's defenders were taking casualties too. One of the ranch hands was down, dead from a warrior's arrow. Another was wounded, out of the fight. James took a bullet through his arm, but kept fighting, his face gray with pain, but his grip steady on his shotgun. And then the Shoshone warriors pulled back, disengaging with the same speed they had attacked. The outlaws followed, retreating out of the canyon, leaving 6 bodies behind. Silence fell like a curtain. The defenders held their positions, not trusting the retreat, waiting for the next attack. It didn't come. Instead, Michael rode forward alone, his hands empty and away from his weapons. He stopped at the edge of rifle range and called out, "Ezra! We need to talk." Ezra emerged from his position carefully, his rifle ready. "Talk, then?" "Not like this. Face to face. You owe me that much." It was a trap. It had to be a trap. But Ezra found himself moving anyway, climbing down from his perch, walking out into the open ground between the two forces. Because, despite everything, despite the violence and the years and the different choices, Michael was still his brother. They met in the middle of the canyon, 2 men separated by a gulf wider than the distance between them. Up close, Ezra could see the lines etched in Michael's face, the old scars and fresh wounds, the weight of years spent carrying hate. But he could also see, buried deep, hints of the boy who had once laughed easily and believed the world could be good. "You're better than I expected," Michael said quietly. "I planned for you being good, but you're more than good. You're brilliant, and your people, they fight like they have something worth dying for." "They do," Ezra said. "Each other. Their home. Their future." "I had that once," Michael said, and his voice cracked slightly. "Twice, and twice I lost it. Twice the world took everything from me. Do you understand what that does to a person, Ezra? Do you understand what it means to build a life and watch it burn? Not once, but twice?" "Yes," Ezra said softly. "I do. I lost my wife and daughter to smallpox. Lost everything that mattered. And I ran, Michael. Ran to a mountain and hid for 15 years because I couldn't face the pain. So yes, I understand." Michael looked at him with something that might have been surprise. "You had a family?" "I did. White Dove and Little Hawk, Shoshone like your family. They taught me what love really meant. And when they died," Ezra's voice caught, "when they died, I wanted to destroy the world too. Wanted to hurt everyone and everything because I was hurting. But you didn't," Michael said. "No. I just destroyed myself instead. Became a hollow man living in a hollow place. Until," he paused, "until someone reminded me that I was still alive. That my life could still matter. That the best way to honor the dead is to protect the living." "Sarah," Michael said. It wasn't a question. "The girl in the wheelchair. You love her." "I do," Ezra admitted. "And she loves me. And that terrifies me, because I know what it means to lose people you love. But I'm choosing to love her anyway, choosing to build a life anyway, because the alternative—" He looked at his brother. "The alternative is what you've become. And Michael, our little brother, the boy I taught to fish and track and ride, he would hate what you've become." Michael flinched, as if struck. For a long moment he just stood there, wrestling with something internal. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to stop, Ezra. The hate, it's all I have left. If I let it go, what's left? A chance, Ezra said. A chance to be someone else, someone better, someone our parents would recognize. He took a step closer. It's not too late, Michael. You can walk away from this, from the violence, from the gang, from the hate. You can choose differently. And then what? Michael's laugh was bitter. I'm wanted in 3 territories. I've killed people, helped kill people. There's no walking away from that. There's always a choice, Ezra insisted. Thomas Greer is a good man. If you turn yourself in, if you help him bring down the rest of the outlaw networks you know about, he'll speak for you. It won't erase what you've done, but it's a start. It's a chance at redemption. Michael was quiet for a long time, his eyes distant. Behind him, his remaining fighters were watching, waiting to see what would happen. Behind Ezra, the defenders held their positions, ready for treachery but hoping for peace. I'll think about it, Michael said finally. Give me 1 day. 1 day to decide who I want to be. 1 day, Ezra agreed. But Michael, if you come back to attack again, I know, Michael interrupted. You'll do what you have to do. You'll fight me. Maybe kill me. I understand. He paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you survived. Glad you found someone to love. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for the boy I was and the man I became. He turned and walked back to his horse, mounted, and led his remaining forces away from the canyon. Ezra watched them go, his heart heavy with hope and dread in equal measure. When he returned to his fighters, Sarah was waiting. She had wheeled herself out from her protective niche, and the look on her face was complicated. Relief that he was safe. Worry about what came next. Will he? She started. I don't know, Ezra said honestly. He said he'd think about it, about choosing differently. But I don't know if he can. If he will, what do we do now? Thomas asked, joining them. We wait, Ezra said. We tend our wounded. We prepare for another attack if it comes. And we hope that the brother I remember is still alive somewhere inside the man he's become. We hope that he chooses the right path. And if he doesn't? James asked, cradling his injured arm. Ezra looked at the canyon, at the blood staining the rocks, at the bodies of men who had died fighting for causes they believed in, whether righteous or misguided. He thought about choices and consequences, about love and loss, about the thin line between justice and revenge. Then we do what we have to do, he said quietly. We protect what matters. No matter the cost. The day passed with agonizing slowness. The defenders returned to Redemption Creek, carrying their wounded, leaving the dead to be dealt with later. The town doctor, sober for once, understanding the gravity of the situation, tended to James's arm and the other injuries, while Margaret organized food and supplies. Sarah sat with her father while the doctor worked, holding his good hand and trying not to show how frightened she had been. James, for his part, kept insisting he was fine, that a bullet through the arm was nothing, that he'd be back in the fight if needed. You did good out there. Your daughter, he said when the doctor had finished bandaging him. I was proud of you. Scared out of my mind, but proud. I was scared too, Sarah admitted. When I saw that warrior about to shoot old Pete, when I pulled the trigger, she stopped, her voice catching. I killed him, Papa. I ended someone's life. James was quiet for a moment, his expression grave. War makes us do terrible things. Things we'll carry for the rest of our lives. But Sarah, you saved old Pete. You protected someone who couldn't protect himself. That warrior made his choice when he climbed that wall. You made yours when you defended your friend. And sometimes that's all we can do, make the best choices we can in impossible situations. Sarah nodded, but the weight of what she'd done sat heavy on her chest. She knew it would take time to process, to come to terms with. For now, all she could do was accept it and move forward. Ezra spent the day preparing for the possibility that Michael wouldn't choose redemption. He reinforced the town's defenses, redistributed ammunition, tried to think 3 steps ahead of every scenario. But his mind kept drifting back to the conversation in the canyon, to the glimpse he'd seen of the brother he'd lost so long ago. Night fell, and the town grew quiet. Guards were posted, but most people tried to rest, knowing they might need their strength tomorrow. Ezra sat on the porch of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, staring at the mountains where Michael was somewhere out there, deciding. Sarah found him there an hour after dark. She had convinced one of the ranch hands to carry her up the steps. Her wheelchair couldn't manage them. And now she sat beside Ezra in the cool night air. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Shouldn't you be resting?" Ezra countered. "I asked first." Ezra smiled despite himself. "No, I can't sleep. Too many thoughts running through my head. Too many what-ifs? Tell me about him," Sarah said. About Michael before. Who was he? So Ezra told her. About a younger brother who had been gentle and curious, who preferred books to hunting, who could name every star in the sky and loved to hear stories. About how Michael had looked up to Ezra with absolute faith, had followed him everywhere, had believed his big brother could do anything. "I taught him to ride," Ezra said, his voice thick with memory. "He was 8 years old, terrified of horses. But he trusted me, and I promised him I wouldn't let him fall. And I didn't. He rode that horse all afternoon, laughing like I'd given him the whole world." "You loved him," Sarah said softly. "I did." "I do." Ezra was quiet for a moment. "And tomorrow I might have to kill him. How do you live with that? How do you pull the trigger on someone you love?" "Maybe you won't have to," Sarah said. "Maybe he'll choose the right path. Maybe the brother you remember is still in there. And if he's not..." Sarah took Ezra's hand in both of hers. "Then you do what you have to do. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. And afterward we carry that weight together. Because that's what love is, sharing the burden so no one has to bear it alone." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands under the stars. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice tentative. "Ezra, if something happens tomorrow, if things go wrong, I want you to know something. These past weeks, learning from you, fighting beside you, just being with you, they've been the happiest of my life. And no matter what happens, I don't regret any of it." Ezra looked at her, at this remarkable woman who had somehow seen past his walls and his wounds to the man he could still be. "Sarah Bennett, when this is over, when we've dealt with whatever tomorrow brings, I want to marry you. I want to spend whatever time I have left making you happy. If you'll have me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Ask me again when we're both still alive. And yes, the answer will be yes." They kissed then, gentle and unhurried, a promise of tomorrows that might never come, but that they chose to hope for anyway. Dawn came too quickly. With it came a rider carrying a white flag, one of Michael's outlaws, looking nervous and young. He delivered a message. Michael wanted to meet with Ezra one more time, alone, at the canyon where they had fought. "It's a trap," Thomas said immediately. "Has to be." "Maybe," Ezra agreed. "Or maybe he's made his choice and wants to tell me in person. Then let me come with you. Hidden, as backup." "No," Ezra said firmly. "He asked for me alone. If I bring backup, if he thinks I don't trust him, it could push him the wrong way. I have to do this alone." "Ezra," Sarah started. "I know," he interrupted gently. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something metal, something that caught the morning light. It was a marshal's badge, tarnished with age, but still recognizable. "I've been carrying this for 15 years. Never thought I'd wear it again. But today," he pinned it to his chest, "today I want Michael to see it. Want him to remember who I was, who I am. The stone judge, who stood for justice even when it was hard." He kissed Sarah one more time, whispered something in her ear that made her eyes fill with tears, and then mounted his horse and rode toward the canyon alone. When he arrived, Michael was already there, standing in the middle of the canyon floor. He was alone, his weapons holstered, his hands empty. As Ezra dismounted and approached, he saw that his brother looked older, more tired, as if he'd aged years overnight. "You came," Michael said. "I said I would." They stood facing each other. Two brothers separated by more than distance, more than time, more than all the violence and pain that had shaped their lives. "I made my choice," Michael said. His voice was steady, but there was something broken underneath it. "I thought about what you said, about redemption, about the boy I used to be. And I realized," he paused, his jaw working. "I realized that boy died a long time ago. Not in the wagon raid, not when the soldiers came. But slowly, piece by piece, every time I chose hate over healing. Every time I hurt someone to ease my own pain. That boy, our little brother, he's gone, Ezra, and he's not coming back." Ezra felt his heart crack. But Michael continued, "He left behind something. A memory of what it meant to be decent, of what it meant to have a brother who tried to protect me, who taught me to be better than I was. And that memory," his voice broke, "that memory won't let me do this anymore. Won't let me hurt more people just because I'm hurting." He reached slowly into his jacket, and Ezra's hand went to his gun. But Michael just pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it out. "Names," he said. "Every outlaw gang I know about. Where they hide, how they operate, who leads them. Everything Thomas Greer needs to clean up the territory. It's not redemption. Nothing can redeem what I've done. But it's something." Ezra took the paper, his hands trembling slightly. "What about you? What happens to you?" "I'm going to turn myself in," Michael said. "Face trial for my crimes. Maybe hang. Maybe rot in prison. But at least I'll face it as myself, not as the creature hate made me into." "That takes courage," Ezra said softly. "Or cowardice," Michael replied. "I'm tired, Ezra, tired of the hate, tired of the running, tired of waking up every day and barely recognizing the man in the mirror. Maybe prison will give me time to figure out who I am without the anger driving me." They stood there for a long moment, two brothers trying to find a way back to each other across an impossible distance. Then Michael did something unexpected. He removed his gun belt, laid it on the ground, and took 3 steps toward Ezra with his arms open. "Goodbye, big brother," he said quietly. Ezra closed the distance and embraced Michael, holding his lost brother for the first time in 25 years. They stood like that, 2 men shaped by loss and violence, trying to salvage something human from the wreckage of their lives. "I'm proud of you," Ezra whispered, "for choosing differently, for finding your way back." "Don't be proud yet," Michael said, pulling back. "I've got a long road ahead, a lot to answer for, but thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing the boy I used to be even when I couldn't see him myself." The sound of gunfire shattered the moment. Both brothers spun toward the canyon entrance where chaos had erupted. Michael's remaining fighters, those who hadn't wanted redemption, who saw their leader's change of heart as betrayal, had ambushed the approach, trying to kill Ezra and reclaim Michael by force. And riding into that ambush, trying to reach Ezra, were Sarah and Thomas and the defenders of Redemption Creek, refusing to let Ezra face danger alone. "No," Michael shouted, running toward his former gang. "Stand down. I order you to—" A shot rang out and Michael stumbled. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then up at Ezra, with an expression of surprise and something that might have been relief. "Well," he said, his voice already weakening, "looks like fate had different plans." Ezra caught him as he fell, lowering him gently to the ground. Around them the battle raged, but in that moment there was only Ezra and Michael, a brother dying in his brother's arms, just as Ezra had thought he'd died 25 years ago. "Hold on," Ezra said urgently. "We'll get you help, "No," Michael interrupted. This is better. Clean ending. No trial, no prison, no more choices. Just the end. Michael, please tell our parents I'm sorry," Michael whispered. "Tell them I tried to be better. At the end, I tried." "They know," Ezra said, tears streaming down his face. "They know, Michael. And they forgive you. They forgive you." Michael smiled, a real smile, the first Ezra had seen in 25 years. "There he is, my big brother, still trying to make everything right." His voice was fading now, each word softer than the last. "I love you, Ezra, never stopped. Even in the hate, even in the darkness, never stopped." "I love you too," Ezra said. "I never stopped either." Michael's eyes closed and his breathing went still. And Ezra Stone, the man who had survived so much loss, who had built walls against grief and lived alone for 15 years, finally let himself break. He held his brother and wept, mourning not just the man Michael had become, but the boy he had been, the life he should have had. All the wasted years and missed chances and choices that couldn't be unmade around him. The defenders of Redemption Creek fought the final battle against Michael's rebellious gang. Thomas Greer led the charge, his federal marshal's authority giving weight to his commands. Sarah fired from her wheelchair, protecting Ezra while he grieved. The ranch hands, old Pete, young Colby, James with his injured arm. They all fought to protect their friend, to give him space to say goodbye to his brother. The fight was over in minutes. The outlaws, leaderless and outnumbered, broke and ran. Some were captured, others disappeared into the mountains. None would trouble Redemption Creek again. When silence finally fell, Sarah wheeled herself to where Ezra sat with Michael's body. She said nothing, just put her hand on his shoulder and let him know he wasn't alone. And in that moment, with his brother dead in his arms, and the woman he loved beside him, and the sun rising over the mountains that had been his refuge and his prison, Ezra Stone finally understood something fundamental about grief and love and the human heart. You couldn't run from pain. You couldn't hide from loss. You could only face it, carry it, and let the people who loved you help bear the weight. It was the hardest lesson he'd ever learned, but it was the one that would finally set him free. 2 weeks had passed since the final battle. Redemption Creek was healing, slowly but surely, finding its rhythm again. The dead had been properly buried, including Michael Stone, who Ezra had insisted be laid to rest in the town cemetery with a marker bearing his real name and the dates of both his births, the day he'd been born and the day he'd chosen redemption. Ezra stood at that grave now, early morning sun warming his face. He came here every day, talking to the brother he'd lost twice, trying to make peace with all the complicated feelings that came with grief and relief and regret, tangled together. "Morning," Thomas Greer's voice came from behind him. The marshal approached with his characteristic quiet respect. "Thought I'd find you here." "Can't seem to stay away," Ezra admitted. "Keep thinking if I'd looked harder, found him sooner, maybe—" "Don't do that to yourself," Thomas interrupted gently. "Michael made his choices, same as we all do. And at the end he chose right. That has to count for something." "It does," Ezra said. "I just wish—" "I know." Thomas stood beside him, looking at the grave marker. "For what it's worth, the information he gave us, it's already paying off. We've rounded up 3 gangs, recovered stolen property, saved lives. Your brother's final act is going to make this territory a safer place. That's legacy worth having." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Thomas cleared his throat. "Actually came to tell you something. Got a telegram from Helena this morning. The territorial governor wants to reinstate you as a federal marshal. Full authority, full salary, based anywhere you want. He said, and I quote, 'The territory needs the Stone Judge now more than ever.'" Ezra was quiet for a long moment. A month ago, hell, 2 weeks ago, he would have said no immediately. Would have retreated to his mountain, to his solitude, to the safety of not caring about anything. But things were different now. He was different now. "What did you tell him?" Ezra asked. "Told him I'd pass along the message. The decision's yours, old friend. No pressure either way." Ezra thought about it. About what it would mean to pin on that badge again, to take responsibility for justice in the territory. About the violence it would bring back into his life, the danger, the hard choices. But he also thought about Sarah, about the town they had defended together, about the people worth protecting, about Michael's sacrifice and what it meant to honor it. "I'll do it," he said finally. "But on my terms. I work out of Redemption Creek. I don't travel unless absolutely necessary. And when Sarah goes to San Francisco for her treatment, I go with her. This town is my home now. These people are my responsibility." Thomas grinned. "I'll send the telegram. The governor will be thrilled." He paused. "Speaking of Sarah, heard you two are getting married?"